Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The rain hammered against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the feeling of unease in the small, dimly lit living room. It was the kind of weather that made you want to stay inside, curl up with a book or a movie, and let the storm rage outside. But for Sarah, Mark, Emily, Jason, and Lily, this rainy Saturday afternoon had taken a different turn. Boredom had crept in, and when boredom sets in, bad decisions often follow. Guys, I'm telling you, we need something to do, Mark said, tossing a worn-out ball up and down in his hands. He was sprawled across the couch, his feet hanging off the edge, eyes scanning the room as if the walls might suddenly reveal a hidden treasure. We could always play a game, Emily suggested, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Emily was the quiet one, the one who usually stayed out of trouble. But even she was starting to feel the weight of the stillness in the room. Yeah, but we've already played everything, Jason chimed in, not looking up from his phone. I'm sick of Monopoly and Cards Against Humanity. We need something different. Lily, the most introverted of the group, was curled up in an armchair, her knees pulled to her chest. She glanced up at the others, her eyes flicking toward the small wooden shelf that held a few dusty board games. What about that one? She suggested, pointing vaguely at the shelf. Everyone turned to look. There, tucked in the corner of the shelf, was an old weathered box. It was different from the others, its edges frayed and the colors faded. The box was nearly buried under a pile of more modern games, but something about it caught their attention. What's that? Sarah asked, frowning as she got up to inspect it. I don't recognize it. Mark shot up from the couch, his curiosity piqued. It looks ancient. Let me see. He grabbed the box and wiped away the dust. The words "The Eternal Quest" were scrawled across the front in a strange, flowing script that none of them could immediately decipher. There were symbols too, intricate, almost hypnotic patterns that seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at them. Is this even a game? Emily asked, leaning forward, her brow furrowed. It doesn't look like one. Jason shrugged. Who cares? It's old. It's probably worth something. Mark shook his head. Let's play it. We've got nothing else to do. And it looks interesting. He was already pulling off the lid, revealing the contents inside. The game board was unlike any they had seen before. It was large, almost too large for their small coffee table, and it was covered in strange markings and landscapes that seemed to stretch endlessly. The board was divided into sections, each depicting eerie, supernatural places, dark forests, cryptic ruins, and shadowy mansions. The pieces were carved from some kind of bone or ivory, each one depicting a different figure, an old man with a lantern, a woman in a flowing gown, a warrior with a sword. Whoa, Jason muttered, eyeing the pieces. This looks like something out of a horror movie. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Sarah said, trying to sound rational. It's just a game, probably some weird vintage thing. But even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about it. The weight of the box, the strange symbols, the way the pieces seemed to stare back at her. It all felt wrong, but it was too late to back out now. They were already committed. Emily picked up the instruction booklet. The paper was old, brittle, and yellowed with age. The text was written in a language that didn't seem to belong to any country she knew. Some words were legible, but most of them seemed to shift when she tried to focus on them. Okay, this is weird, Emily said, holding the booklet up to the others. I can't even read most of this, but there's a part at the end that seems like it might be instructions. Mark leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the page. Let me see that. He tried to decipher the symbols, but after a few moments, he gave up. Whatever. Let's just play. We'll figure it out as we go. With a shrug, he grabbed the die, a large cracked stone with strange, runic symbols carved into it, and rolled it across the board. The pieces moved as if guided by some unseen hand, and the game was officially underway. Sarah was the first to take her turn. She grabbed her piece, a small, intricately carved figure of a woman in a flowing gown, and placed it on the starting space. Mark had already rolled the die, and it landed on a symbol that none of them could identify. "Okay, I'll go next," Sarah said, picking up the die. She shook it in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the strange energy emanating from it. With a deep breath, she tossed it onto the board. The die tumbled across the surface, its symbols flashing briefly before it landed with a soft thud. It was a strange roll. No numbers, just a series of cryptic markings. "Well," Emily asked, looking at Sarah, "what does it mean?" Sarah leaned forward, staring at the symbols. "I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. It looks like a tree and a door." Mark grabbed the instruction booklet, flipping through the pages. "There's got to be something in here about it." He stopped at a page near the back, his eyes scanning the words. "Okay, here's something. The first roll awakens the spirit of the game. Proceed with caution." Jason snorted. "What the hell does that mean?" But before anyone could respond, a chill swept through the room. The temperature seemed to drop, and the air grew thick with an unsettling heaviness. Sarah shivered, glancing around the room. "Did anyone else feel that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I did," Emily whispered, her eyes wide. "It's like the room just changed." Lily, who had been quiet up until now, looked at the game board with wide eyes. It's not just the room," she said softly. "It's the game. It's real." The others stared at her, unsure of what she meant. But when they looked back at the board, they realized she was right. The board had changed. The once abstract symbols on the spaces had shifted, becoming more defined, more detailed. The landscape of the game was now alive, as if it were unfolding before them, drawing them in. "Okay, this is getting creepy," Mark said, standing up. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm starting to get a bad feeling about it." But it was too late. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on them like a weight they couldn't shake. The strange chill lingered, and for a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the rain against the windows, though it felt as if the storm outside had somehow grown louder, more violent. "Okay, I'm officially freaked out," Jason muttered, his eyes flicking nervously from the game board to the others. "This is starting to feel like one of those stupid horror movies where the characters make all the wrong decisions." "Shut up, Jason," Sarah said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. She was trying to laugh it off, but even she couldn't ignore the tension in the air. "It's just a game. We're probably imagining things." Lily didn't say anything, but her wide eyes were fixed on the board, her fingers gripping the armrests of her chair tightly. She hadn't even moved since Sarah's roll. He felt drawn to the game in a way she couldn't explain. It was as if the board was calling to her. "Right," Mark said, breaking the silence. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had crept over him. "Let's just keep going. It's probably all in our heads. We roll the die, move the pieces, and draw a card. No big deal." He picked up the die, his hand trembling ever so slightly. He gave it a quick shake and tossed it onto the board. It clattered across the surface, landing on a strange symbol. This time, it was a jagged line that twisted like a serpent. "Okay, what now?" Mark asked, his voice tight. Emily grabbed the card deck, her fingers brushing over the cold surface of the cards. They were heavy, the texture of the paper rough and worn. She drew one, the edges curling slightly as she pulled it from the stack. She stared at it for a moment, her eyes widening as she read the words. "The Path of Shadows," Emily read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "To proceed, you must face your deepest fear. If you succeed, you will gain the power to move ahead. If you fail, you will lose something precious." The words hung in the air like a curse, their meaning sinking in slowly. Everyone looked at each other, uncertainty spreading through the group. "Okay, that's unsettling," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "What does that even mean?" Jason scoffed, though there was a nervous edge to his laughter. "It's just a game, right? It's all just pretend. We're supposed to do something scary? Fine, let's just get it over with." Lily's gaze flicked back to the board, her face pale. No, it's not pretend. It feels real. Mark swallowed hard, then turned to Emily. What does it say we have to do? Emily scanned the card again, her fingers trembling. It doesn't say exactly, just that we have to face our fear, whatever that means. All right, Mark said, standing up. I'll go first. What's the worst that could happen? He stepped away from the table, his eyes scanning the room. He looked at the door, the windows, the shadows in the corners. Okay, what's my deepest fear? Probably, I don't know, spiders. Or snakes. Something like that. He laughed nervously, but there was no humor in it. His eyes darted to the dark hallway that led to the basement door. The others watched him in silence, waiting. There was a strange energy in the room now. Something heavy and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mark took a step toward the hallway, then stopped. He glanced back at the group. I'm just going to check the basement. It's dark down there, and I don't know. I'll be right back. Mark, wait, Sarah called out. But it was too late. He was already walking down the hall, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Should we stop him? Emily asked, her voice barely audible. No, Jason said, though his words lacked conviction. Let him do it. It's just part of the game, right? We'll all take turns. But Lily, her eyes wide, felt a gnawing unease in the pit of her stomach. She didn't want to be left alone with the game. Not now. Not with the way it seemed to pulse, alive with some dark energy. Mark reached the basement door and hesitated for a moment. The door creaked as he turned the handle, and the darkness beyond seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. A few moments passed, and then a scream. It was a sound that froze them all in place. Mark's scream echoed up the stairs, raw and terrified. The others jumped to their feet, panic rising in their throats. Mark! Sarah shouted, rushing toward the basement door. She reached for the handle, but it was locked. She pulled again, harder this time, but the door wouldn't budge. Mark! Emily cried, her voice shaking. What's happening? The scream stopped as abruptly as it had started, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that made your skin prickle and your breath catch in your throat. Something's wrong, Lily whispered, her voice trembling. She backed away from the door, her eyes darting to the game board. We shouldn't have played this. We shouldn't have touched it. Mark's voice broke through the silence, but it was no longer his voice. It was distorted, distant, as though it was coming from far away. Get out of here. The words were barely audible, but they were enough to send a shiver down their spines. What the hell? Jason muttered, backing away from the door. This isn't funny anymore. The game board suddenly shifted. The pieces moved on their own, sliding across the surface as if guided by invisible hands. A chill ran through the room as the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. Guys, I think we need to stop, Sarah said, her voice cracking. She took a step back from the board, but the game seemed to draw her in. This isn't normal. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the next card. She drew it quickly, desperate to make sense of what was happening. She turned it over. The Keeper of Shadows, she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. To move forward, one must sacrifice something precious. Only then will you be allowed to escape. The room seemed to close in on them. The game had already claimed its first victim, and now it wanted more. The silence in the room was suffocating. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows, a stark contrast to the growing tension that gripped the group. The air felt thick, charged with something they couldn't explain. The temperature had dropped further, and Sarah could see her breath misting in the cold air. It wasn't just the basement door anymore. The entire room felt wrong. Mark, Sarah called out, her voice trembling. She pressed her ear to the door, listening for any sound, any movement from the other side. But there was nothing. No response. No further screams. Should we go in? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes wide with fear. Lily, who had been standing in the corner, staring at the game board with a vacant look in her eyes. shook her head. No, we can't. It's not safe. We're not supposed to go in. Sarah turned to her, her face pale. What do you mean? Not supposed to? Mark's in there, Lily. We have to help him. But Lily didn't answer. She was still staring at the game board, her eyes unfocused, as if she were seeing something beyond the room, something that none of them could see. Jason was the first to move. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for the basement door. I don't care what the game says. We're getting Mark out of there. But just as his hand touched the door, a strange, deep growl echoed from the other side. It was low, guttural, and it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He jerked his hand back, his face pale. What the hell was that? Before anyone could answer, the door creaked open by itself. They froze. The door swung wide, revealing the dark, empty basement. The dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the stairs that descended into the shadows below. But there was something else, something wrong. A dark, swirling mist seemed to be creeping up from the basement, curling around the edges of the stairs like fingers reaching out to pull them in. Mark! Sarah called again, her voice cracking. Mark, are you there? There was no answer, only the oppressive silence. Lily finally turned away from the board, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. It's him, she whispered. Mark isn't down there anymore. What do you mean? He isn't down there anymore? Emily asked, her voice rising in panic. He has to be. He was just screaming. Lily's gaze flicked back to the game board, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He's not the same. Whatever is down there. It's not him anymore. It's something else. Jason, his face pale, stepped forward. I'm going in. I don't care what's down there. Mark's our friend. We can't just leave him. Before anyone could stop him, he walked toward the basement door. The mist seemed to grow thicker, swirling around his legs as he took each step toward the stairs. Sarah and Emily exchanged a look, both terrified but unable to stop him. Jason, wait, Sarah called, but he was already halfway down the stairs. Don't! The last of her words were swallowed by the deep growl that came from below. It was louder this time, more insistent. The mist seemed to grow heavier, swirling faster, as if it were alive. Jason hesitated, but it was too late. The darkness at the bottom of the stairs seemed to pull at him, tugging him closer. Jason! Emily screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of something shifting in the darkness. Jason froze, his eyes wide with terror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a low, raspy voice echoed through the basement. It wasn't Mark's voice. It was something else, something ancient and malevolent. Leave this place, or suffer the consequences. The words vibrated through the air, sending a chill down their spines. The mist swirled around Jason's feet, creeping up his legs like tendrils. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. It was as if the shadows themselves were holding him in place. Jason! Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. Get out of there! But it was too late. The mist surged upward, enveloping him completely. His body jerked, as if something unseen was pulling him into the darkness. His eyes widened in terror, and his mouth opened in a silent scream. The last thing they saw was the flicker of his figure being swallowed by the shadows. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went still. The basement was silent again. The mist had vanished. The door creaked shut on its own, leaving the group in the darkness of the hallway. Jason, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Jason, please, come back. But there was no answer. They stood there for a long moment, frozen in shock, unable to move or speak. The reality of what had just happened was too much to process. Their friends, Mark, Jason, had disappeared into the game, into the darkness that had come alive with the roll of the die. We need to get out of here, Emily said finally, her voice low and shaky. This isn't a game anymore. It's real. But just as she turned to head toward the door, she froze. Her eyes locked on the game board. It had changed. The once distant, abstract symbols on the board were now clear, etched in sharp, jagged lines. The pieces had moved again, this time toward the center of the board. The path they had been following, one they thought was just a simple game, had become a winding, twisted road that led directly to the Eternal Throne. And there at the center was a new card. The Keeper's Test, Emily read aloud, her voice quivering. To win, one must sacrifice what is most precious. To lose is to become one with the game. Sarah stepped back, her hand trembling as she reached for the card. "We're trapped," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We're all trapped." Lily, who had been standing quietly by the door, suddenly spoke. Her voice was hollow, distant, as if she were no longer fully present. "It's not just a game," she said softly. "It's us. We're part of it now. We've always been part of it." The others turned to her, their faces pale with disbelief. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. Lily's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was no fear in them, only a strange, unsettling calm. "The game doesn't just take you. It changes you. We've all been here before. Every time the game resets, we play again, and again, until the game is finished." "No," Emily said, shaking her head. "No, that can't be true. We can't." But Lily's voice cut through her words, low and steady. "We've been here before. We're already part of the game." The room was suffocating. The shadows seemed to press in from all sides, and the cold was unbearable, seeping into their bones. Sarah, Emily, and Lily stood in the center of the room, their eyes wide with disbelief. The events of the past few moments had shattered any sense of normalcy they had clung to. Mark and Jason were gone, swallowed by the game, and now they were left to face whatever horrors it had in store. Lily's words echoed in Sarah's mind. "We've been here before. We're already part of the game." Sarah shook her head, trying to push the thought away. No, this can't be happening. We have to find a way out." Emily's hands were trembling as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. How? How do we get out?" "The game. It's alive. It's controlling everything." Lily didn't respond. She stood by the door, her eyes distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the walls of the room. Her face was pale, her expression empty, and for a moment, it seemed like she wasn't even there with them. "Do you know what's happening, Lily?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking with fear. "What do you mean we've been here before?" Lily's gaze finally shifted back to Sarah, and for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "It's not just the game," she whispered. "It's us. We're part of it. All of us." Emily stepped forward, her face contorted with confusion and terror. "What are you talking about? What do you mean we're part of it?" Lily's voice was barely audible, but it carried a weight of dread. "The game. It feeds on fear. It traps you in a loop over and over again. You think you're playing it, but it's already decided. We're in its grip now. We can't escape." Sarah's heart raced. "No, this isn't real. We're just scared. This is some kind of nightmare, right? This has to be a nightmare." But Lily shook her head slowly, her face blank. "It's not a nightmare, Sarah. It's real. It always has been." Emily took a step back, her eyes wide with panic. I can't do this. I can't just accept that we're stuck here. We have to find a way to fix this. We have to get Mark and Jason back." Lily's lips curled into a faint, almost sad smile. "You can't fix this. There's no going back. The game doesn't work that way." Sarah's mind was racing, her thoughts spinning. The game, the cards, the mist, the way it had taken Mark and Jason so easily, the way it had changed everything in an instant. She had to believe there was a way out. There had to be. She turned to the game board, her eyes drawn to it against her will. The pieces had shifted again, moving on their own, as though they were alive. The path on the board had grown darker, more twisted, and the symbol at the center, the Eternal Throne, seemed to pulse with a strange energy. "We have to finish it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "We have to finish the game. Maybe that's the only way we can get out." Emily looked at her, her face pale with terror. "Are you serious? Finish it? After what happened to Mark and Jason, you want us to keep playing? I don't know what else to do." Sarah snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "We have to try. If we don't, we'll never get out of here." We'll be stuck in this nightmare forever. Lily didn't respond. She simply walked over to the table, her eyes locked on the board. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were in a trance. She picked up a card from the deck without hesitation, her fingers brushing against the worn edges. The Keeper's Gift, Lily read aloud, her voice flat. To proceed, one must offer a gift, a sacrifice of the heart. Only then will the path be cleared. Emily recoiled. A sacrifice? What does that even mean? Sarah's stomach twisted. I don't know, but I think it's the only way forward. If we don't do this, we'll never leave. Lily's eyes flicked to Sarah, and for a moment, there was something in her gaze, something dark and knowing. You know what you must do, she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. What? What do you mean? Sarah demanded, her voice rising in panic. What do we have to do? But Lily didn't answer. She placed the card face down on the table and turned toward the basement door. No, Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Not again. We can go down there. Not after what happened to Mark and Jason. But Lily was already walking toward the door, her expression unreadable. We have no choice. Sarah felt her heart race as she followed Lily, her mind a blur of fear and confusion. The basement door creaked open again, the mist swirling at the bottom of the stairs, beckoning them into the darkness. Please, Emily pleaded, grabbing Sarah's arm. We can't do this. It's not real. It's just a game. We can stop it. But Sarah shook her head, her eyes fixed on Lily's retreating figure. We have to finish it, Emily. We have to finish it before it finishes us. With that, she stepped into the darkness, following Lily down the stairs. The basement was colder than it had been before. The air was thick with an unnatural heaviness, and the shadows seemed to stretch out, swallowing the dim light from the hallway. The mist curled around their feet, rising up like tendrils, as if trying to pull them deeper into the darkness. Lily walked ahead, her steps slow and deliberate, as if she were drawn to something in the depths of the room. Sarah and Emily followed hesitantly, their hearts pounding in their chests. At the far end of the basement, a faint light flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. It was coming from an old, rusted chest that sat in the corner, half buried under a pile of forgotten furniture. Lily stopped in front of the chest, her eyes fixed on it. The gift, she whispered almost reverently. Sarah swallowed hard. What is this? What do we have to do? Lily turned to face her, her expression distant. It's time to give what the game wants. With trembling hands, Lily reached for the chest, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. She opened it slowly, revealing the contents inside. The chest was empty, except for a small, ancient-looking mirror. It was cracked, its surface marred by deep lines, but it seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. It was the kind of mirror that seemed to reflect not just your image, but your very soul. Lily picked it up, her fingers tracing the edges of the glass. This is the gift, she said softly. The sacrifice of the heart. We must give something that is ours to the game. Emily stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. No, no way. I'm not doing this. This isn't real. It can't be. But Lily's eyes were fixed on the mirror, her expression unreadable. It's already done, she whispered. We've already given ourselves to the game. The mirror in Lily's hand seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, casting faint reflections that didn't quite match the dim light of the basement. It was as if the mirror wasn't just reflecting their images, but something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of their very souls. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to turn away from whatever was happening, but she couldn't. Her feet were rooted to the spot, her eyes unwillingly drawn to the cracked surface of the mirror. She had to know. She had to understand what the game wanted from them. What? What is this? Emily whispered, her voice trembling. What are we supposed to do with it? Lily didn't answer immediately. She stood still, staring at the mirror, her fingers tracing the edges. Her face was blank, but there was something in her eyes, something almost trance-like. It was as if she was no longer fully aware of the others in the room. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step forward. Lily, what are we supposed to do? Finally, Lily spoke, her voice soft and distant. We give it what it wants. We give a piece of ourselves. Emily shook her head, her voice rising in panic. No, I'm not doing this. I'm not giving anything to this thing. It's not real. Lily's eyes flicked to Emily, and for a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in her gaze, something that wasn't quite human. It was a darkness that seemed to stretch deep into her soul. It's already real, Lily said, her voice almost a whisper. We're already part of it. There's no turning back. Sarah's stomach twisted. What do you mean? We're already part of it. What's happening to you, Lily? But Lily didn't respond. Instead, she stepped closer to the mirror, her eyes locking onto the cracked surface. Sarah felt an overwhelming urge to follow her, to understand what was happening, but she was frozen in place. Something was pulling at her, drawing her in. The mirror seemed to shift, its reflection warping and changing. Sarah saw flashes of images, fragments of memories half formed and distorted. Faces, places, the sound of laughter, followed by screams. And then something else, something dark and cold, like an abyss opening wide, waiting to swallow them whole. Suddenly, the mirror began to glow, a soft, pulsing light emanating from its depths. It was as if the glass itself was alive, breathing in time with their hearts. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched the reflections in the mirror shift again. This time, the faces were clearer, Mark and Jason, their expressions frozen in terror, their eyes wide with a fear that seemed to pierce straight through her. Mark, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Jason. The figures in the mirror didn't respond. They simply stared back at her, their faces contorted in silent screams. The image shifted again, and Sarah saw herself. But it wasn't the Sarah she knew. It was a twisted version of her eyes hollow, her face gaunt and pale. The reflection smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of something darker, something twisted. This is what it wants from you. The reflection of Sarah whispered, her voice a low, chilling hiss. You will become part of the game, forever. A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. She stumbled back, her heart racing. No, this isn't happening. This isn't real. But the reflection of herself in the mirror didn't fade. It lingered, staring back at her with eyes that weren't her own. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the image vanished, replaced by the dark, swirling mist of the basement. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she backed away from the mirror, her hands shaking. We have to stop this. We have to get out of here. Emily's voice trembled with fear. How? How do we stop it? Lily didn't respond. She was still standing before the mirror, her face expressionless, as if she had already accepted whatever fate the game had in store for them. This isn't a game anymore, Sarah said, her voice breaking. We're not just playing. We're trapped. The basement seemed to grow darker, the shadows pressing in from all sides. The air felt thick, suffocating. Sarah could feel the weight of something ancient and malevolent pressing down on them, as if the house itself were alive, feeding off their fear. Lily turned toward them, her eyes cold and distant. You can't escape. You've already given yourselves to the game. No, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the terror clawing at her insides. I won't accept that. We're getting out of here. We have to fight. Lily's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. You can't fight it. The game is already inside you. It's already begun. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of something shifting echoed through the basement. The mist swirled, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Then, a low growl reverberated through the air, deep and guttural. It was the same growl they had heard before when Mark had screamed. Mark, Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. Jason, but there was no answer. Only the growl, growing louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The air grew thick with the smell of decay, and the mist began to rise, swirling around their ankles. It was as if the basement itself were alive, feeding off their fear, drawing them deeper into its grip. The growl grew louder, closer. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized they weren't alone in the basement anymore. Something was coming. Run! Emily screamed, her voice high-pitched with terror. Run! But before they could move, the basement door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The growl was now deafening, reverberating through the walls. The shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and shifting as something massive and unseen moved toward them. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she turned to face Lily. What is it? What's coming? Lily's eyes were wide, her face pale. She was no longer calm, no longer distant. She was terrified, just like the rest of them. It's the Keeper, Lily whispered, her voice shaking. It's come for us. The ground shook again, and a shadowy figure emerged from the mist. It was tall, towering over them, its form obscured by the swirling darkness. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its presence radiated pure malice. It was the Keeper, the one who controlled the game, and it was here to claim them. The Keeper loomed in the mist, its form barely discernible, yet its presence was overwhelming. It towered over them, casting an oppressive shadow that seemed to stretch across the entire basement. The growl that emanated from it was like the sound of something ancient and malevolent, a deep, resonating vibration that rattled the bones and stirred the very air around them. Sarah's heart raced as she looked at the others. Emily was shaking, her wide eyes locked on the figure, her lips trembling as she tried to speak, but could only manage a strangled whisper. Lily, on the other hand, was staring at the Keeper with a strange mixture of fear and resignation. It was as if she knew this moment was inevitable, as if she had been expecting it all along. The Keeper's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, a sickly yellow that seemed to pierce through the mist, locking onto Sarah with a chilling intensity. It wasn't just looking at her, it was looking into her, as if it could see every fear, every doubt, every dark corner of her soul. You are mine, the Keeper's voice rumbled, deep and gravelly, like the sound of stones grinding against each other. It wasn't a voice that came from its mouth, but from the very air around them, vibrating in their bones. All of you are mine. Sarah felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. What do you want from us? She managed to choke out, her voice barely audible. The Keeper's form shifted, its shadowy body writhing like smoke, and then it spoke again, its voice like 100 whispers combined into one. The game is not over, child. You are still players in this game, and you will remain players until I say otherwise. Emily's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? We can't. We can't play anymore. We just want to go home. The Keeper's eyes glowed brighter, the yellow light flaring like burning embers. You cannot go home. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, sinking into her like a cold weight. She had been trying to convince herself that it was all a nightmare, that they could wake up, that they could escape. But the Keeper's words shattered that illusion. There was no escape. Not now. Lily took a step forward, her voice low and resigned. The game doesn't let you go, not unless it's finished with you. Sarah turned to her, her voice desperate. What do you mean, finish with us? What's going to happen? Lily's eyes flicked toward the Keeper, her face pale, her lips barely moving as she spoke. The game feeds on fear. It grows stronger with every soul it claims. Mark and Jason, they've already given their pieces. Now it's our turn. No, Emily cried, her voice cracking. We're not giving anything to this thing. We can't. The Keeper's laugh echoed through the basement, hollow and mocking. You have already given more than you realize, little one. You've already started the sacrifice. You just don't know it yet. The mist thickened, swirling around their feet, rising higher with each passing moment. The air grew colder, and the shadows stretched, reaching toward them like hands. Sarah's mind was racing. She had to think. She had to find a way out. What do we have to do? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the rising terror. What's the price? What do we need to do to end this? The Keeper's eyes narrowed, its form shifting again, becoming more defined. The price is simple. You must make a choice. You must offer a piece of your soul. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A piece of our soul? She whispered, horrified. The keeper's form seemed to stretch, its limbs elongating unnaturally. Yes, a sacrifice. A part of you must remain here, bound to the game forever. Only then will the path be cleared. No! Emily's voice was a broken whisper. No, we won't do it. We won't sacrifice anything. The keeper's eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity. You have no choice. You have already played the game. Now you must finish it. Lily stepped forward, her expression unreadable. We don't have much time. Her voice was low, almost resigned. The game is relentless. If we don't do it willingly, it will take more than just our souls. It will take everything. Sarah's mind was spinning. She couldn't just give up a piece of herself. But the thought of losing everything, of being trapped in this nightmare forever, was unbearable. She glanced at Emily, who was still shaking, her face pale with fear. We can't do this, Emily whispered, her voice hoarse. We can't give up anything to this thing. The keeper's form loomed closer, its shadow engulfing them. You will. You have no choice. Sarah felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, the air thick with an almost tangible pressure. The mist swirled around them, and the shadows seemed to reach out, tugging at her, pulling her toward the keeper. It was as if the game itself was alive, feeding off their fear, tightening its grip around them. Lily turned to Sarah, her face pale, her voice barely a whisper. We have to choose, or it will choose for us. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what Lily meant. The game had already taken them. They were already part of it. There was no escaping it, not without a price. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the mirror, her fingers brushing against its cold surface. The reflection in the glass was distorted, but she could still see her own face staring back at her, pale, terrified, but determined. She wasn't going to let the game win. She couldn't. We'll do it, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the fear that gripped her chest. We'll give a piece of ourselves, but we'll find a way to end this. We'll find a way to destroy the game. The keeper's laughter echoed again, low and menacing. You cannot destroy what is eternal. But Sarah didn't care. She had made her choice. They would give the game what it wanted, but they wouldn't be its prisoners forever. She would find a way out. The mist swirled around them, and the keeper's form began to dissipate, fading into the darkness. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The game had only just begun. The basement had grown eerily quiet. The keeper's presence, though still palpable, had receded into the shadows. The mist that had been swirling around their feet had thinned, but the air remained thick with tension, charged with an unnatural energy that made it difficult to breathe. Sarah stood motionless, her fingers still pressed against the cold surface of the mirror. Her mind was racing, each thought colliding with the next. She had made the decision. She had agreed to give the game a piece of herself. But what did that even mean? What would the game take from her? And what would be left when it was over? Emily's voice broke through the silence, a raw whisper. What did you mean, Sarah? What did you mean by we'll find a way to destroy the game? Sarah turned toward her, her heart heavy with the weight of her words. I don't know, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. But I can't just give up. We can't just let it take us. Lily, who had been standing silently in the corner, finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost detached. The game will take everything from you if you let it. If you defy it, it will only become worse. Sarah's gaze snapped to Lily. What do you mean by that? Lily's eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to Sarah. It will feed on your fear, your defiance. The longer you resist, the more it will take. But we can't just give in, Emily said, her voice cracking. We can't just let it take us. Lily's face was unreadable. You don't have a choice. The keeper doesn't care about your resistance. It will take what it wants, and it will make you wish you had given in sooner. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if Lily had already surrendered to the game, as if she had accepted that there was no way out. But Sarah couldn't accept that. She wouldn't. We have to find a way, Sarah said, her voice firm. We have to fight. There has to be something we can do. The mist in the basement had thickened again, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. Sarah could feel them pressing in on her, suffocating her, as if the very walls were closing in. The keeper was still out there, watching, waiting. "You cannot fight it," Lily said, her voice barely audible. "You can't fight what's already inside you." Sarah turned toward the mirror once more, her reflection staring back at her. The face that looked back at her was pale, her eyes wide with fear. But there was something else there too, a glimmer of determination. She wasn't going to let the game win. Not like this. Suddenly, the air shifted, and the basement door slammed shut with a deafening crash. The sound of footsteps echoed from the dark corners of the room, slow and deliberate, like someone, or something, was approaching. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The keeper was coming back. Before she could react, a voice echoed through the basement, chilling and deep, like the growl of an animal. "You think you can defy me?" The keeper's form materialized from the mist, its eyes glowing with that sickly yellow light. It was closer now, its towering figure filling the room. Its voice reverberated through the walls, rattling Sarah's bones. "You will learn the price of defiance," the keeper growled, its voice like 100 whispers, all blending together into a single, terrifying sound. Sarah's breath hitched. She had to act. They had to act. "No!" Sarah shouted, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she had. "We're not giving in. We'll find a way to end this." The keeper's laughter echoed through the basement, low and mocking. "You think you can defeat me? You think you can escape the game?" The mist swirled around Sarah's feet, rising higher, wrapping around her ankles like tendrils of darkness. She could feel the air growing colder, the shadows growing thicker, pressing in from all sides. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and the basement seemed to shift, as if the very foundation of the house was being torn apart. The walls groaned, and the floor cracked, sending splinters of wood shooting up into the air. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the room seemed to warp around them, the space distorting in a way that made her dizzy. "You have no power here," the keeper hissed. "You are mine. All of you are mine." Emily gasped, stumbling backward. "We can't." But before she could finish, the mist began to swirl faster, and the shadows seemed to come alive, crawling toward them like a living thing. The keeper's form grew larger, towering over them, its eyes glowing brighter, its presence suffocating. Sarah's pulse raced. She could feel the weight of the keeper's power pressing down on her, but she refused to give in. She wouldn't let it take her. "What do you want from us?" Sarah demanded, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her insides. "What is the game? Why are we here?" The keeper's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw something shift behind its gaze, a flicker of something ancient and unfathomable. "The game is eternal," the keeper said, its voice like the grinding of stones. "It feeds on your fear, your suffering. It is a cycle, and you are but pieces on a board. You will play until the end, and when the end comes, you will be mine." "No," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We won't play anymore. We won't let you control us." The keeper's laughter filled the room, loud and deafening. "You have no choice. You are already part of the game, and you will stay here, in this place, for as long as I desire." Suddenly, the mist thickened around them, and the shadows grew darker, more oppressive. Sarah felt the air grow heavy, suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, the room shrinking with each passing second. She had to act. She had to do something. But what? What could they do against something like this? Then, something inside her snapped. The fear that had been building up inside her for so long, the terror that had gripped her heart, suddenly turned into something else. Something cold, something sharp. She wasn't going to let the keeper win. "We will fight," Sarah said, her voice low and steady. "We will fight until the end." The keeper's eyes narrowed, its form shifting. "Then you will suffer." And as the shadows closed in, Sarah knew that the true game had only just begun. The room seemed to pulse with the keeper's presence, the air thick with the weight of its malevolent energy. The shadows pressed in from all sides, wrapping around them like tendrils of darkness, pulling them closer to the center of the basement. The keeper's laughter reverberated through the walls, a sound that was both mocking and triumphant. Sarah could feel her heart racing, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the fear clawed at her chest. But beneath the fear, something else burned, a cold, unyielding determination. She couldn't let the keeper win. She couldn't let it claim them. "We're not giving up," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "We won't let you control us." The keeper's eyes glowed brighter, the yellow light flickering like flames in the dark. "You think you can defy me?" it hissed, its voice low and rumbling. "You are nothing but pieces in my game, and you will remain mine." Lily's voice cut through the tension, her tone flat and resigned. "There's no way out, Sarah. You can't fight it. The game has already taken us. You just don't realize it yet." Sarah's gaze snapped to Lily, her anger flaring. "No, I refuse to believe that. We're not trapped here. We're not pawns in some twisted game." The keeper's form loomed over them, its shadow stretching across the room, enveloping them in darkness. The mist around them thickened, swirling in a hypnotic dance, and the temperature in the basement dropped, sending a chill through Sarah's bones. She could feel the keeper's eyes on her, drilling into her soul, as if it could see every fear, every doubt, every weakness. But Sarah refused to break. She had to find a way to fight back. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled, and the walls of the basement seemed to shift, warping and distorting. The air grew heavy, pressing in on them, making it hard to breathe. The keeper's presence grew stronger, more oppressive, as if it were closing in on them from all sides. "You cannot escape," the keeper said, its voice a low growl. "You will never escape. You belong to me now." Sarah's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. She wasn't going to let it end like this. She wouldn't give in. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice firm. "We'll find a way to break the game." The keeper's eyes flickered with amusement. "You think you can break the game? You think you can break me?" But Sarah's resolve only strengthened. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't. Not when Mark and Jason were still out there, trapped in the same nightmare. Not when she still had a chance to end it all. "I don't care what you are," Sarah said, her voice rising with newfound strength. "I'm not afraid of you." The keeper's laughter echoed again, louder this time, a deep, rumbling sound that shook the very foundations of the house. "You are afraid," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "You are all afraid. You cannot hide from your fear. It will consume you." The mist swirled faster, the shadows growing longer, more twisted. Sarah could feel the fear gnawing at her insides, the terror threatening to overwhelm her. But she fought it down, pushing it aside. She had to stay strong. She had to keep fighting. "We are not afraid of you," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "We will not give in to you." The keeper's form shifted again, its massive shape twisting and contorting, as if it were made of darkness itself. "You will learn," it said, its voice a soft whisper, like a promise of something far worse to come. "You will learn that there is no escape from the game, no escape from me." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the walls of the basement cracked, the sound of splintering went filling the air. The mist rose higher, swirling around them like a living thing, choking off any escape. "You cannot fight me," the keeper hissed, its voice growing louder, more insistent. "You cannot resist me." Sarah felt the pressure building around her, the weight of the keeper's presence closing in on her. She could feel the darkness creeping in, the shadows wrapping around her like chains, pulling her down. She could feel her fear rising again, threatening to swallow her whole. But then something inside her snapped. The fear that had been gnawing at her for so long. Fear of the game, fear of the keeper, fear of losing her friends shifted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anger. It was defiance. She wasn't going to let the keeper take them. She wasn't going to let it win. With a cry of determination, Sarah reached out, grabbing hold of the mirror that still hung in the air before them. Her fingers brushed the cold surface, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The mist stilled, the shadows paused, and the keeper's form flickered, as if uncertain. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the mirror, her reflection staring back at her. It was a twisted version of herself, pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow with fear. But there was something else there, something strong, something fierce. She wasn't just going to play. She wasn't going to just give in. With all the strength she could muster, Sarah pressed her hand against the mirror, pushing against the cold surface. The reflection in the glass seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. The keeper's form flickered again, its yellow eyes narrowing in confusion. "No," the keeper growled, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot." But Sarah didn't let up. She pressed harder, her hand burning against the glass, as if she were trying to break through to something beyond. She could feel the mirror's power, the strange energy it held, the connection it had to the game. She could feel it beginning to crack under her touch. And then, with a loud, shuddering crack, the mirror shattered. The basement seemed to explode with light. The mist dissipated, the shadows retreated, and the oppressive weight that had been bearing down on them lifted. The keeper's form flickered and distorted, as if it were being torn apart by the very force of the shattering mirror. For a moment, everything was still. The silence was deafening. Then, the keeper's voice, now a whisper, echoed through the basement. "This is not over." And with that, it was gone. The silence in the basement was overwhelming, a strange kind of stillness that pressed in on Sarah's chest, making it difficult to breathe. The mirror had shattered into thousands of jagged pieces, the shards scattering across the floor like 1,000 tiny mirrors reflecting the dim light that had filled the room. The keeper's presence had dissipated, but Sarah knew that it wasn't truly gone. It was just waiting, lurking in the dark, biding its time. Sarah's hand still hovered in the air, the cold sensation of the broken mirror lingering on her skin. She could feel the strange energy that had surrounded it, the power that had kept them trapped in the game. It was gone, but she knew that it was only temporary. The keeper was not finished with them. "Is it over?" Emily's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. She was standing a few feet away, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Did we win?" Sarah turned to her, her breath still shallow, her pulse racing. "No, we haven't won. Not yet." Lily stepped forward, her expression unreadable, as always. "The game isn't over, Sarah. The keeper doesn't let you go that easily." Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I don't care. I'm not going to let it win. I'm not going to let it take us." But Lily's eyes, dark and distant, seemed to hold a deeper knowledge. "You can't fight it. The game will keep coming for you. You can't escape it by breaking the mirror." Sarah's frustration boiled over. "Then what are we supposed to do, Lily? Just give up? Let it take us one by one?" Lily didn't answer right away. She just stared at Sarah, her gaze heavy, as though she were seeing something Sarah couldn't. There is only one way to truly end the game, but it's a price none of us are willing to pay. Sarah felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. "What do you mean? What price?" Lily's voice dropped to a near whisper, her words laced with an unsettling sense of finality. "The keeper feeds on fear, on suffering. But there's something deeper, a darkness that connects us all, something we've all given to the game. To break free, to truly destroy it, one of us has to take the keeper's place." The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog, and for a moment, no one spoke. Sarah's mind raced, her thoughts spinning in a chaotic frenzy. The keeper had been toying with them, manipulating their fears, their emotions. But this was something else entirely. "Take his place?" Sarah repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "You mean sacrifice ourselves?" Lily's eyes softened, but the sadness in them was clear. "Not just sacrifice. It's more than that. It's becoming part of the game. A piece of the game. To stop it, to end it, someone has to become the keeper." The weight of her words sank into Sarah's chest, making it hard to breathe. She could feel the room closing in on her, the walls pressing tighter and tighter, as if the very house was alive and aware of the conversation they were having. "No!" Emily whispered, shaking her head. "There has to be another way. We can't. We can't just give up someone. We can't let the game claim another life." Lily's gaze flickered toward the broken mirror, where the shards still glimmered on the floor. "It's not about giving up a life. It's about stopping the cycle. The game has been going on for centuries, feeding on fear, on souls. If we don't end it, it will continue. It will consume us all." Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to accept that there was no other way. But deep down, she knew that Lily was right. The game had already taken so much from them. The mirror, the keeper, the fear, it was all part of a much larger, much darker force. And if they didn't stop it, it would keep coming for them, for anyone who dared to enter the game. "I can't," Emily said, her voice shaking. "I can't let anyone take that burden. We have to find another way." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The keeper's voice echoed in her mind, the words from earlier haunting her. "You will be mine." The keeper had said it so many times. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise that it would take them all, one by one, until there was no one left to resist. But what if they didn't have to resist? What if the only way to stop it was to face the game head on? What if they had to become part of it, to destroy from within? "We have to decide," Sarah said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We have to choose. Either we let it take us, or we make the ultimate sacrifice to end it." Lily nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "The game will never let you go. But if one of you takes the keeper's place, it will stop. It will end." Sarah felt a cold shiver run through her as the weight of the decision settled over her. She wasn't sure she could make that choice. Could she ask one of them to become the keeper? Could she make that sacrifice herself? But before she could say anything more, the air around them shifted. The basement seemed to warp again, the walls stretching, the shadows growing thicker. The mist returned, swirling around them like a living thing, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The keeper's voice echoed through the basement, low and menacing. "You think you can break the game? You think you can escape me?" The shadows around them deepened, and the keeper's form began to materialize again, its massive shape looming over them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "You cannot defeat me," the keeper hissed. "You are already mine, and you will remain mine." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the keeper's form flickered, its presence growing stronger. She could feel the game tightening its grip on them, pulling them deeper into its web. But she knew what she had to do. "No," Sarah said, her voice firm, her heart steady. "We will not let you win." The keeper's eyes narrowed, its form flickering as if it were preparing to strike. "Then you will learn the price of defiance." And in that moment, Sarah realized that the game had always been about choice, about sacrifice, about the cost of breaking free. And now, they had to make their choice. They had to decide who would pay the price. The air in the basement grew heavy, thick with the suffocating weight of the keeper's presence. Its voice reverberated through the walls, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Sarah could feel the ground beneath her feet trembling, as though the very house itself was alive and reacting to the keeper's wrath. The shadows stretched longer, swirling around them like a storm of darkness. "We are not your pawns," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. She stood at the center of the room, her fists clenched at her sides, every muscle in her body tensed. "We won't let you control us." The keeper's form flickered in and out of existence, its massive shape distorted, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a creature of pure darkness, its presence so overwhelming that it felt as though the world itself was being consumed by it. Sarah could feel the fear creeping back in her chest, threatening to take hold of her again. But she fought it down. She had to. For herself. For her friends. "You think you can stop me?" The keeper's voice was low and mocking, the sound echoing around the room. "You are nothing but fragile, broken things. You will never escape." Lily's voice cut through the tension, calm and distant. You can't fight it, Sarah. The game will keep coming for you. It's a part of you now. It's in your blood. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. In your blood. Those words echoed in her mind, the realization sinking in. The game wasn't just something they had stumbled into. It was something deeper, something connected to them all in ways they didn't fully understand. What do you mean? Sarah asked, her voice tight. What does that even mean? Lily's eyes were hollow, as though she had seen the truth and could no longer turn away from it. The Keeper. It's not just a creature. It's a force. It feeds on fear, yes, but it also feeds on something else, something darker. It feeds on the part of us that wants to give in, that wants to surrender. The game is a reflection of our deepest fears, our darkest desires. It's always been inside us. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The realization was almost too much to bear. They hadn't just been drawn into the game. They had been chosen. They had been marked. And now they had to face the consequences. We have to make a choice, Sarah said, her voice trembling but determined. One of us has to take its place. The room seemed to go still at her words, the oppressive atmosphere thickening, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The Keeper's form flickered again, its yellow eyes narrowing as it watched them. You understand, don't you? The Keeper's voice was a whisper, like a lover's breath against her ear. You cannot escape. You cannot fight me. The game will always find a way to claim you. And in the end, someone must take my place. Sarah's stomach twisted in knots. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, threatening to crush her under its enormity. She could see the fear in her friend's eyes, the uncertainty, the guilt. They all knew what had to be done, but none of them were ready to make that sacrifice. Emily stepped forward, her eyes wide with terror. No, I won't let anyone take that burden. We can't just give ourselves to it. Lily's voice was soft, almost sorrowful. The game will never let you go. It will keep coming for you. And when it does, it will take more than one. It will take all of you. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she knew Lily was right. The Keeper wasn't just a monster. It was a force that fed on their fear, their desperation. It had been playing with them from the very beginning, manipulating them, feeding off their emotions. And if they didn't make a choice, if they didn't stop it now, it would continue, growing stronger, until it claimed them all. It's the only way, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. One of us has to take its place, or we all fall. The weight of her words settled over them like a blanket of cold steel. The room felt smaller, more suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in on them. Sarah could feel the Keeper's presence pressing against her, its dark energy crawling into her mind, whispering promises of power, of release. She could feel it, the fear, the doubt, the temptation. You will be mine, the Keeper whispered, its voice a seductive hiss. You will be free. All you have to do is surrender. The words were like poison, slipping into her thoughts, twisting them. Sarah could feel the pull, the temptation to give in, to let go of the burden of responsibility, to let the game claim her. It would be so easy. She could just let go and let the darkness consume her. But she couldn't. She couldn't let it win. No, Sarah said, her voice firm. We will not surrender to you. We will fight. We will end this. The Keeper's form flickered, its eyes narrowing in rage. You cannot defy me. You are nothing but ants beneath my feet. You cannot escape. You cannot fight me. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was focused on her friends, on the choice they had to make. They couldn't keep running. They couldn't keep hiding from the truth. They had to face it. They had to make the sacrifice. She looked at each of them in turn, her eyes filled with determination. One of us has to take the Keeper's place, but we can't let it destroy us. We have to fight it from the inside. Emily's voice was soft, trembling with fear. How? How can we fight something like that? How can we fight the game itself? Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know how to destroy the Keeper, how to break the game. But she knew one thing. They couldn't do it alone. They had to work together. They had to choose. I don't know how to stop it, Sarah said, her voice steady. But I know we can't do it alone. We have to make the choice together. We have to decide who will take its place. And we have to fight to the end. The keeper's laughter echoed through the room, dark and menacing. You think you can win? You think you can defeat me? Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped forward, her eyes locked on the keeper's form. We will end this, one way or another. The keeper's eyes flickered with a mixture of amusement and rage. Then you will learn the price of defiance. And in that moment, Sarah knew the game had always been about choice, about sacrifice, and now they had to face the consequences. The air in the basement grew even colder, the shadows thickening as the keeper's form loomed larger, its presence suffocating. Sarah could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the uncertainty of what lay ahead threatening to overwhelm her. The keeper's laughter echoed in her ears, mocking them, taunting them with the knowledge that they were running out of time. But Sarah refused to let the fear take hold. She had come too far, fought too hard to let it win now. The keeper's eyes gleamed with malicious intent, its voice a low hiss that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. You think you can defeat me? You think you can stop me? We don't have to defeat you, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. We just have to end the game, and that means one of us has to take your place. The keeper's laughter died, replaced by an eerie silence that filled the room. For a moment, Sarah thought it might be considering her words, but then the darkness around them seemed to pulse with rage, the air thick with the weight of its power. You are all fools, the keeper sneered. You cannot comprehend what you are asking. To take my place is to give up everything, to become me, to feed on fear, to feed on souls. Lily stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. We understand, but we won't let you control us anymore. We will make the choice, even if it means we lose everything. Sarah's heart skipped a beat at Lily's words. The sacrifice was not just about giving up their lives. It was about becoming something else. Something dark, something twisted. To take the keeper's place was to become the very thing they had been fighting against. Emily's voice was soft, trembling with fear. But who will do it? Who will take its place? The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Sarah's mind raced. Who could make that choice? Who could give up everything, knowing the consequences? She could feel the weight of the decision pulling at her, the responsibility too great for anyone to bear alone. I can't, Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I can't be the one. I won't become that. Lily's gaze flickered to Sarah, her eyes filled with a strange sadness. It's not about becoming the keeper. It's about stopping the cycle. Someone has to do it, and it has to be one of us. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The choice was impossible. No one was ready for this. No one was prepared to become the very thing they had been running from. But deep down, she knew there was no other way. The game would never end unless someone took the keeper's place. I'll do it, Sarah said, her voice firm, even as her heart twisted in her chest. I'll take its place. The room fell silent. Emily's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening and closing as though she were searching for words that wouldn't come. Lily stood motionless, her face unreadable, but Sarah could see the faint flicker of something. Regret? Sorrow? No, Emily said, her voice shaking. You can't do this, Sarah. We can't let you sacrifice yourself. I'm not sacrificing myself, Sarah said, her voice quieter now, but filled with a quiet strength. I'm ending this. The game, the keeper, it all ends with me. I'm the one who started it. I'm the one who has to finish it. Lily stepped forward, her eyes dark with something Sarah couldn't quite read. You don't understand, Sarah. The price isn't just your life. The keeper doesn't just take you. It takes everything you are. It consumes your soul. It makes you part of the game. I know, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I won't let it take any of you. I won't let it keep feeding on us. The keeper's voice cut through the tension like a knife. You think you can stop me? You think you can sacrifice yourself? And in this, you are nothing. I am everything. I will consume you. just as I have consumed all the others before you." The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, the walls closing in as the keeper's presence became almost unbearable. Sarah could feel the pull, the temptation to give in, to let the darkness take over. It whispered promises of power, of freedom from fear. But she wouldn't listen. She couldn't. "I'm not afraid of you," Sarah said, her voice steady now. "I'm not afraid of what you'll do to me, because I know the truth. You feed on fear. You feed on pain, but you don't have control over me anymore. You never did." The keeper's form flickered, its eyes narrowing in rage. "You are mine," it hissed. "You will always be mine." But Sarah didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the keeper's glowing form. "No, I will not be yours. I will end this." And with that, she reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the mirror shard that lay at her feet. The world around her seemed to shudder. The shadows recoiled, the darkness swirling around her like a storm. She could feel the keeper's power trying to pull her in, to consume her, but she fought against it, her will stronger than the fear. For a moment, everything was still. The air was thick with tension, the room silent except for the sound of Sarah's heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then, the keeper's form shattered, its presence collapsing into the air like a dying star. The room was silent. Sarah opened her eyes, her body trembling with exhaustion. The shadows were gone. The mist had dissipated. The house was still. The game was over. But as she looked around at her friends, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she had done, she realized that the cost had been far greater than she could have ever imagined. The silence in the basement was deafening. The air was still, but the weight of what had just transpired hung heavy in the room. Sarah stood motionless, her hand still hovering over the broken mirror shard, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her heart pounded in her chest, the echoes of the keeper's malevolent presence still reverberating in her mind. She had done it. She had taken its place. The game, the keeper, it was all over. But something felt wrong. "Sarah," Emily's voice broke the silence, trembling with a mix of fear and relief. She stepped cautiously towards Sarah, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Did you do it? Did you really become the keeper?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't know if she could explain what had happened. All she knew was that the darkness had receded, but the emptiness in her chest, the hollow feeling that had settled deep inside her, was still there. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't feel different." Lily, who had been standing in the corner, watching quietly, finally spoke. Her voice was low and filled with something Sarah couldn't quite place. "It's not about feeling different. It's about what you've become. The keeper's power doesn't just vanish. It lingers. It changes you." Sarah turned to Lily, her gaze hardening. "What do you mean?" "I stopped it. The game is over. We're free." Lily stepped closer, her eyes meeting Sarah's with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach tighten. "You think you've won? You think it's over? The keeper's power doesn't just disappear. It's inside you now, and you're going to have to live with it, live with him." The words hit Sarah like a blow to the chest. She had known, deep down, that the sacrifice wasn't just about stopping the game, it was about taking on a part of the keeper. But hearing it out loud, hearing Lily's words, made it all feel far too real. "No," Emily said, shaking her head. "No, we can't let this happen. We can't let Sarah carry that burden. There has to be another way." But Lily's eyes were dark, her expression grim. "There isn't another way. The keeper's power is ancient. It doesn't just disappear. It needs a vessel, and Sarah is now that vessel." Sarah's heart sank as the weight of Lily's words began to settle over her. She could feel it now, the presence, the power that had been dormant within her, stirring just beneath the surface. It was subtle, like a whisper in the back of her mind, but it was there, and she could feel it growing stronger, feeding on her fear, on her uncertainty. "You will never be free," the voice echoed in her mind. It was the keeper's voice, distorted and faint, but unmistakable. "You are mine now, forever." No, Sarah whispered to herself, trying to push the voice away. She couldn't let it consume her. She couldn't let it take her the way it had taken so many before her. But the truth was undeniable. She had become part of the game. The Keeper's power was inside her, and there was no way to undo it. "Sarah," Emily said softly, her voice full of concern. "We'll figure this out. We'll find a way to get rid of it. We can't just leave you like this." But Sarah shook her head, her mind reeling. "I don't think there's a way out. I think I'm stuck with it." Lily stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You're not stuck. You're something else now. The Keeper's essence is inside you, and it will always be a part of you. But it doesn't have to control you. Not if you fight it." The words were meant to be comforting, but they only served to deepen Sarah's sense of dread. How could she fight something so powerful? Something that had existed for centuries. Something that had fed on fear and souls. "I don't know if I can," Sarah admitted, her voice cracking. "I don't know how to fight this. It's already inside me." Lily's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Then you'll have to learn." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fear and uncertainty. The house was still, the oppressive atmosphere that had once surrounded them now gone. But Sarah knew the truth. The game had ended, but its consequences had only just begun. And as she stood there, surrounded by her friends, she realized that the hardest part of the battle was yet to come. Because the Keeper was no longer just a shadow in the dark. It was inside her, a part of her now, and she had no idea how to control it. Days passed since Sarah made the ultimate sacrifice, but the world outside felt different. The house was still, the weight of the Keeper's presence no longer hanging over them. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something deep inside her, just beneath the surface, was stirring. It wasn't just the whispers in her mind. Those had become a constant presence, faint but unmistakable. It was the way her reflection seemed slightly off in the mirror, how her own thoughts felt foreign, as though they weren't entirely her own. She had hoped that after the game ended, after she took the Keeper's place, things would return to normal. But as the days wore on, the darkness inside her only seemed to grow stronger. The power she had absorbed, the Keeper's essence, was not something that could be so easily contained. It had taken root, and now it was part of her, entwining itself with her very being. "I can feel it," Sarah whispered to herself as she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her skin seemed pale, her eyes too bright, too intense. She looked different. She wasn't sure if it was the lingering effects of the game or if it was something more sinister, but she couldn't deny that the change was real. "Sarah," Emily's voice came from the hallway, soft and hesitant. "Are you okay?" Sarah turned away from the mirror, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine." But she knew she wasn't. She could feel the Keeper's presence in the back of her mind, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. It wanted control. It wanted to consume her completely. Emily stepped into the room, her face full of concern. "You don't look fine. You've barely eaten anything. You haven't been sleeping. And you keep staring at yourself like you don't recognize who you are anymore." "I'm just tired," Sarah lied, forcing her smile to remain in place. "It's just everything that happened. I think it's finally catching up with me." Emily didn't seem convinced. She stepped closer, her eyes searching Sarah's face, looking for something she couldn't quite name. "Sarah, I know you're trying to hold it together, but we're all worried about you. You're not the same. You don't feel the same." Sarah swallowed hard, the weight of her friend's words pressing down on her chest. Emily was right. She didn't feel the same. But how could she explain it? How could she tell them that she was slowly becoming something else, something that wasn't entirely human anymore? The whispers in her mind grew louder, like a chorus of voices, urging her to give in, to embrace the power that had taken root inside her. "You are mine now," the Keeper's voice purred. "You will never be free. You will always be mine." "I'll be fine," Sarah said, her voice more firm this time, though it sounded hollow to her own ears. "I just need some time to process everything." Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded, stepping back. "Just don't shut us out, okay?" "We're here for you." Sarah nodded, but as Emily left the room, she felt a pang of guilt twist inside her. She wanted to believe that things could go back to normal. She wanted to be the person she was before, the person who wasn't haunted by the whispers of a dark entity, the person who hadn't made a deal with something ancient and malevolent. But deep down, she knew that person was gone, and the person she was becoming was something else entirely. That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing. The house was silent. The only sound the occasional creak of the floorboards or the wind howling outside. But inside her, the storm was far more violent. The keeper's presence was growing stronger. The whispers were no longer faint. They were clear, insistent, like a dark symphony playing just beneath the surface of her thoughts. "You can't fight it, Sarah. You were always meant for this. You were always meant to become me." She clutched the blankets tightly, her knuckles white. She couldn't let it win. She couldn't let herself become the monster the keeper wanted her to be. But the temptation was there, always there, pulling at her, coaxing her to give in. "Let go," the keeper whispered, its voice seductive, soothing. "You don't have to fight anymore. You can be free. Just surrender to me." "No," Sarah whispered aloud, shaking her head as though to dispel the voice. "I won't let you take me." But the keeper only laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed in her mind. "You're mine, Sarah, and you always will be." She felt the power inside her stir again, like a dark tide rising within her, threatening to overtake her. The urge to give in was overwhelming, like an itch she couldn't scratch, a hunger she couldn't ignore. "You can control it," the keeper coaxed. "You can use it. You can be more than you ever were. You can be powerful. All you have to do is embrace it." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the voice, trying to ignore the pull of the darkness that was so tempting, so easy to surrender to. But as the minutes stretched on, the pressure in her chest grew unbearable. She was so tired of fighting. The whispers were so loud now, like a storm inside her head, filling her thoughts, drowning out everything else. "You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to be afraid. You can be free. Just let go." Her breath hitched as she fought the urge to give in. She could feel the power rising within her, a dark force that was both terrifying and exhilarating. But she knew if she let it take over, if she allowed it to consume her, she would never be the same again. She would become the keeper, and she couldn't let that happen. With every ounce of willpower she had left, Sarah forced herself to sit up, gasping for breath. She had to resist. She had to fight. She couldn't let the darkness take over. But as she stood, her vision blurred, the room spinning around her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were all she could hear. "You belong to me now, Sarah. You always have." And in that moment, Sarah realized the terrifying truth. The battle was far from over. The keeper was not something she could simply defeat. It was a part of her now, a shadow that would always follow her, always haunt her. And no matter how hard she fought, it would never truly let her go. Sarah stumbled into the kitchen the next morning, her eyes heavy with the lack of sleep, her body still aching from the restless night. The house was quiet, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Everything felt too normal, too ordinary. But she wasn't ordinary anymore. She could still feel it, the weight of the keeper's power pressing down on her, the whispering presence that never seemed to fade. Every step she took felt heavier, as though the very air around her was thick with the darkness that had taken root inside her. "Sarah," she turned to find Emily standing in the doorway, her expression soft but filled with concern. She looked tired too, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of worry and determination, that made Sarah's heart ache. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice hoarse, as she tried to force a smile. "I didn't mean to worry you. I'm just tired." Emily didn't buy it. "You've been saying that for days." "Sarah, this isn't just about being tired. We can see it. You're not yourself." Sarah's stomach twisted. She wanted to tell Emily the truth, to explain what was happening inside her, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She couldn't bear to tell her that the darkness wasn't something she could escape, that it was already part of her, and there was no going back. "I'm fine," Sarah said again, more firmly this time, though her voice wavered slightly. "I just need to get used to everything, to what happened." Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step forward, her gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "We're worried about you, Sarah." Sarah's heart sank. She couldn't bear the thought of her friends seeing her as something different, something dangerous. She had promised herself she wouldn't let them see the change, wouldn't let them see the way the Keeper's essence had seeped into her very soul. But it was getting harder to hide it. "Maybe you should talk to Lily," Emily suggested gently. "She knows more about what you're going through. Maybe she can help." Sarah's breath hitched at the mention of Lily's name. She had been quiet lately, withdrawn in a way that made Sarah uneasy. Lily had been the one to warn her, to tell her what would happen if she took the Keeper's place. And yet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more Lily wasn't telling her. "I'll be fine," Sarah said again, her voice cracking slightly. "I just need some space." Emily hesitated, clearly not convinced, but she finally nodded. "Okay, but promise me you'll talk to us if you need to. We're not leaving you alone in this." "I promise," Sarah lied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. As Emily left the room, Sarah sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. The whispers were louder now, their voices overlapping until they were all she could hear. "You can feel it, can't you? The power inside you, the power you've always craved." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the voice, but it was futile. The Keeper's essence was a part of her now. It had become a dark thread woven into the fabric of her being, and it would never let her go. "You can use it, Sarah. You can control it. All you have to do is accept it." The temptation was overwhelming. She could feel the power bubbling beneath the surface, a dark energy that could make her more than she ever was. It promised strength, control, freedom from fear. All she had to do was surrender. But she couldn't. She couldn't let it consume her. She couldn't become the thing she had fought so hard to destroy. "You already are," the voice whispered, its tone almost affectionate now. "You always were. You just didn't know it yet." Sarah's chest tightened as she tried to force the thoughts away. She couldn't give in. She wouldn't. But as the minutes ticked by, she felt the pull grow stronger, like a magnetic force drawing her deeper into the darkness. She could feel the Keeper's essence clawing at the edges of her mind, urging her to let go, to embrace what she had become. And for a moment, just a moment, Sarah wondered if it would be so bad to give in. The door to the basement creaked open, the sound of it echoing through the house. Sarah had been avoiding the basement ever since the game had ended, but something was pulling her toward it now. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the whispers. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that there was something she had missed, something important hidden down there. As she descended the stairs, the air grew colder, the shadows darker. The basement felt different now, empty but full of echoes. The remnants of the game still lingered in the air, in the walls, in the very space around her. The Keeper had been defeated, but its mark was still there, still haunting every corner of the house. Sarah's footsteps were slow, deliberate, as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The basement seemed to stretch out before her, an endless expanse of shadows and dust. But it was in the far corner that she saw it. The mirror shard. It was glowing faintly, its edges jagged and broken, but it pulsed with a strange energy that made Sarah's heart race. She hadn't thought about the shard since the game had ended. She hadn't dared to touch it, afraid of what it might still represent. But now, the pull was undeniable. The Keeper's voice echoed in her mind again. "Take it. Use it. You can control everything." Without thinking, Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing against the shard. The moment she touched it, a shock of cold energy surged through her, and the world seemed to tilt. Her vision blurred, her body trembling as the power coursed through her veins. "Yes," the voice whispered, its tone thick with satisfaction. "You are ready. You are the Keeper now." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the darkness rising within her, The power that had once been the Keeper's, now hers to command. She could feel the fear, the pain, the souls that had been consumed by the game. They were all there, swirling around her, feeding into the power that was now hers. And for the first time, she understood the temptation. The power was intoxicating. It promised control, freedom, a way to make everything right again. But at what cost? Sarah stood frozen, her hands still gripping the shard of the broken mirror, the energy from it coursing through her like an electric current. The coldness was sharp, invasive, but not painful. It felt like an invitation, a whisper in the dark, promising her everything she had ever wanted. You can be more than you ever dreamed. The Keeper's voice hummed in her mind, soothing and enticing. You can have power. You can make the world bow to you. Her pulse raced, and for a moment, she considered it. The power was intoxicating, seductive. It filled the emptiness inside her, made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in days. All the fear, all the uncertainty, gone, replaced by the raw, unfiltered potential of the Keeper's power. But then the memories of what had happened, the faces of the people who had been lost, the victims of the game, flashed in her mind. The price of the power, the price of becoming the Keeper. She gasped, stumbling back, dropping the shard to the floor with a sharp clink. The room seemed to spin as she fought to regain control of herself. The darkness inside her surged, as though it were alive, a beast clawing at the edges of her mind. "You cannot resist me," the voice whispered, growing louder, more insistent. "You are mine now. You will always be mine." "No," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't let you take me." But the pull was undeniable. She could feel the power rising inside her, like a storm gathering strength. The mirror shard on the floor pulsed faintly, as if it were alive, as if it were waiting for her to pick it up again, to embrace what it offered. The basement felt colder now, the shadows deeper, as if the darkness was alive, feeding off her fear, her hesitation. The whispers were louder, swirling around her like 1,000 voices, each one urging her to give in, to surrender. But Sarah fought back, her fists clenched at her sides. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let the Keeper's essence consume her completely. She turned and ran up the stairs, her breath ragged, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't stay down there any longer. She couldn't stay in that place where the darkness felt so close, so real. As she burst into the living room, Emily and Lily were sitting on the couch, talking quietly. They both looked up as Sarah entered, their faces filled with concern. "Sarah," Emily asked, standing quickly. "What happened? You look—" "I need to leave," Sarah interrupted, her voice shaking. "I need to get out of here." Lily's eyes narrowed. "What's going on? What happened down there?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She could feel the power still swirling inside her, still tugging at her. The Keeper's voice was like a constant hum, a presence she couldn't escape. "Sarah," Emily said softly, "what's happening? You're scaring us." "I'm scared too," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know how to control it. It's inside me. The Keeper, the game. I can't." She stopped herself, taking a shaky breath. "I can't fight it." Lily stood up, her expression darkening. "You can fight it," she said, her voice low and firm. "But you need to want to. You need to take control. The Keeper's power is in you, but it doesn't own you. Not yet." Sarah shook her head. "I don't know if I can anymore. It's too strong. It's too much." Emily stepped forward, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We'll figure this out together. You don't have to do this alone." But Sarah could feel the weight of the truth settling in. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. The power inside her was growing, and the whispers were becoming harder to ignore. "You don't need them," the Keeper's voice whispered. "You only need me." "No," Sarah said aloud, her voice stronger this time. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her mind. "I can't listen to you anymore. I won't let you control me." Lily's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to Sarah. "You have to fight, Sarah. You have to want to fight. Because if you don't—" The words hung in the air, unspoken but understood. If she didn't fight, she would lose herself. She would become the keeper. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she looked at her friends. They were still there, still fighting for her. But the darkness inside her was strong, too strong. And the longer she stayed in this house, the more she felt it trying to pull her under. "I have to go," Sarah whispered. "I have to leave." Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Leave? Where are you going?" "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "But I can't stay here. I can't stay with you and risk what I might become." Lily stepped forward, grabbing Sarah's arm. "Don't do this," she said, her voice sharp. "You don't know what's out there. The Keeper's power doesn't just go away. It will follow you. It will find you." "I have to try," Sarah said, her eyes filled with desperation. "I have to do this on my own. I can't keep dragging you into this." Emily looked at Lily, and then back at Sarah, her face filled with fear and sadness. "Sarah, please don't leave us." But Sarah couldn't stay. Not with the Keeper's voice in her mind. Not with the power threatening to consume her. She couldn't risk dragging her friends down with her. "I'm sorry," she whispered before turning and running out the door. The streets were cold, the sky overcast, as Sarah walked aimlessly through the town. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she couldn't stay. She couldn't stay in the house, with the mirrors and the darkness, with the whispers that never stopped. "You can't escape me," the Keeper's voice murmured, soft but insistent. "You will never escape me." She ignored it, pushing forward, walking faster, trying to outrun the voice, the power, the very essence of the thing she had become. But no matter how far she walked, she couldn't escape it. The darkness was inside her, and it would always be inside her. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the biting chill of the coming winter. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the silence, her breath coming out in short, ragged bursts. She had no destination, no plan. All she could think about was getting as far away from the house, from her friends, from the darkness that had taken root inside her. She had left everything behind, the comfort of familiar faces, the safety of her home. But the further she walked, the more she felt the weight of her decision. The Keeper's power was growing inside her, like a slow-burning fire, and no matter how fast she moved, she couldn't escape the heat. "You can't outrun me," the Keeper's voice whispered again, its tone like a soft caress, yet full of threat. "You are mine now, Sarah. You will never be free." She gritted her teeth, pushing the voice away, but it was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. It was like an addiction, the pull of the power, the promise of control. It was hard to remember who she had been before it all began. The girl who had laughed with her friends, who had felt safe in the world. Now, everything felt distant, as though she were watching her life unfold from a great distance. The girl she had been was slipping away, and the girl she was becoming was a stranger, one who was far more dangerous. The town was quiet, the streets deserted. Sarah's eyes flicked to the shadows, half expecting to see something move, something watching her. The silence felt suffocating, and for a moment, she wondered if she was truly alone. Then she heard it, a soft, melodic voice, carried on the wind. "Sarah." She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a voice she knew, but she couldn't place it. It was sweet, almost soothing, but there was something off about it. Something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Sarah." She turned, her breath catching in her throat. Standing just a few feet away in the middle of the street was a figure. It was a woman, tall and slender, her face obscured by a hood. The figure's eyes gleamed in the dim light, glowing faintly, like two orbs of light in the darkness. For a moment, Sarah thought she might be hallucinating. The exhaustion, the stress, the overwhelming pressure of the darkness inside her, it was all starting to blur together. But the figure didn't move, didn't speak. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. The woman didn't answer immediately. She simply stepped closer, her movements smooth and deliberate. As she came into the light, Sarah saw her face, a pale, ethereal face with features that seemed almost too perfect. Her eyes were wide, almost unnaturally so, with a strange, unsettling gleam. "I've been waiting for you," the woman said, her voice soft, almost like a lullaby. Sarah took a step back, her heart racing. "Waiting for me? Why?" The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're special, Sarah. You've been chosen. The Keeper has made you what you are, and now you are ready." "Ready for what?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The woman tilted her head, as if considering the question. "Ready to embrace your true nature. Ready to become what you were always meant to be." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She knew, instinctively, that this woman was not just some stranger. She was connected to the darkness that had been consuming her, to the force that had taken over her life. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. I'm not like that." The woman took another step closer, her smile widening. "You already are, Sarah. You just don't know it yet." Before Sarah could react, the woman reached out, her hand brushing Sarah's cheek. The touch was cold, like ice, and it sent a shock of energy through Sarah's body. She gasped, her vision blurring for a moment, as the woman's words echoed in her mind. "You are the Keeper now. You are the one who will bring the darkness to the world." Sarah staggered back, shaking her head, trying to push the woman away, but her grip tightened. The power inside Sarah surged, responding to the woman's touch, and for a moment, she felt the pull of the darkness again, stronger than ever before. "No," she cried, her voice breaking. "I won't let you control me." The woman's smile faltered, but her eyes never left Sarah's. "You cannot fight it forever. You were chosen, Sarah, and the Keeper's influence is too strong. You will never escape." Sarah felt the power rising inside her, threatening to consume her once again. The whispers were louder now, more urgent. They were no longer just in her mind. They were in the air, surrounding her, suffocating her. "Let go," the Keeper's voice urged. "Embrace what you are. You have the power to change everything." But Sarah fought back, digging her nails into her palms, her breath ragged. She could feel the power inside her, but she refused to let it control her. She would not let it take over. Not now. Not ever. With every ounce of strength, she wrenched herself free from the woman's grip, stumbling back. The woman didn't move, didn't chase after her. Instead, she simply stood there, her eyes glowing brighter, her smile widening. "You will return to me, Sarah," she said softly. "You will come back to the darkness. It is your destiny." The words echoed in Sarah's mind as she turned and ran, her legs trembling, her heart pounding. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The woman's words haunted her, the pull of the darkness gnawing at her every step. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to losing herself. Sarah didn't stop running until her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed on the cold ground, gasping for air, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. She had to keep moving. She had to get away. But the weight of the darkness inside her was growing heavier with each passing second. "You cannot escape me," the Keeper's voice whispered, its tone soothing, yet chilling. "You belong to me." She closed her eyes, trying to block out the voice, trying to find some shred of peace, but it was impossible. The power was too strong, too overwhelming. And the woman, the figure in the street, had been a warning. The Keeper was not done with her. It was just beginning, and Sarah was running out of time. The night had fallen cold, and Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she sat against the crumbling brick wall of an abandoned building. Her limbs ached from the frantic run, her heart still racing from the encounter with the woman. She could feel the power inside her, like a weight pressing against her chest, demanding to be unleashed. "You cannot hide forever." The voice was insistent, like a low hum in her ears, vibrating through her very bones. "You are mine, Sarah. The Keeper's power is in you. You will never be free." She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to shut out the voice, but it was impossible. The darkness had taken root in her, and every time she thought she could escape, it pulled her back in, deeper, further into its grasp. The streets around her were empty, silent. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves. She had wandered aimlessly for hours, her mind clouded with confusion and fear. She couldn't go back, not to the house, not to her friends, not when she was like this. They'll never understand, the voice cooed, soothing and malicious all at once. They will fear you. You will hurt them. You must stay away. Sarah shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. She didn't want to believe it, but a part of her did. A part of her felt the truth of the words deep in her gut. She was changing. She was becoming something she didn't recognize. And no matter how hard she tried to fight it, the power inside her was growing stronger, demanding her surrender. "You're scared," the voice said, now almost gentle, as though it were consoling her. "It's okay. Embrace it. It's who you are now. You can't fight your nature. You never could." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the voice, trying to regain some semblance of control. She couldn't let it take over. She wouldn't let it. But the more she resisted, the more she felt the pull of the darkness. It was like a magnet, drawing her in, feeding on her fear, her doubt. She could feel it in her chest, in the pit of her stomach, a gnawing emptiness, a hunger that only the Keeper's power could fill. She opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly, but it wasn't just from the cold. The power was there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to surge forth if she allowed it. "You don't have to be afraid," the voice whispered. "Let go. Let it consume you. You will be stronger than you've ever been." Her breath hitched as the urge to surrender grew stronger. She could feel the warmth of the power, like fire spreading through her veins, filling the emptiness inside her. For a moment, it felt right. It felt like the only thing that could make sense of the chaos inside her. But then, as if to counter the growing darkness, a memory flashed in her mind. The faces of her friends, their worried expressions, their pleas for her to fight. Emily, Lily, they had been there for her, even when she hadn't been able to see it. "You can't go back to them," the voice warned, its tone turning darker, more insistent. "They will never understand what you've become. They will turn against you." But Sarah couldn't ignore the memory. She couldn't forget the way Emily had held her hand, the way Lily had looked at her with understanding, even when she had been consumed by fear and doubt. They hadn't abandoned her. Not yet. With a force of will, she pushed the darkness back, just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. She couldn't give in. She wouldn't let herself be swallowed whole by the Keeper's influence. She had to find a way to fight it. The sound of footsteps broke through her thoughts, sharp and steady. Sarah froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She wasn't alone. She turned, her eyes scanning the shadows, searching for the source of the sound. There at the end of the alley stood a figure. It was a man, tall and cloaked in shadow, his face hidden beneath a hood. He didn't move, just watched her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Sarah stood up, her body tense, her fists clenched at her sides. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were testing her reaction. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a growl. "You don't know what you've become, do you?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The words sent a chill down her spine. "How could he know? I don't know what's happening to me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's inside me, what I've become." The man tilted his head, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're the Keeper now. The power is inside you, and it's growing stronger with every passing moment." Sarah took a step back, her breath quickening. "No, I'm not the Keeper. I can't be." The man stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You are, and soon it will be too late to turn back. You'll either embrace the darkness, or it will consume you. There's no middle ground." Her chest tightened as his words sank in. She had been fighting it, trying to hold on to the person she had been. But the man's words rang true. The power was inside her. It was a part of her now, and if she didn't find a way to control it, she would lose herself completely. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded again, her voice stronger now, despite the fear gnawing at her. The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was cold, predatory. I'm someone who's been where you are. I've seen what happens when the darkness takes hold. And I'm here to help you, whether you want it or not. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Help me? By making me embrace it. The man's smile faded. No, by showing you the truth. You don't have a choice. You've already made it. The Keeper's power is in you, and it will consume you if you don't learn how to wield it. Sarah took a step back, shaking her head. I can't. I won't become like that. The man's expression softened, almost pitying. You already are. You just don't know it yet. The darkness surged within her, its presence undeniable. She could feel it, clawing at the edges of her mind, pushing her toward the man, toward the power he promised. But Sarah refused to give in. She couldn't. Not yet. Sarah stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold brick wall, her breath shallow and ragged. The man's words echoed in her mind, reverberating like the toll of a distant bell, relentless and inevitable. You already are. You just don't know it yet. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog that was settling in her thoughts. She couldn't let herself believe it. She couldn't. She wouldn't become the Keeper. Not like the woman in the street had said. Not like the man in the alley was urging her to do. But as she stood there, the pull of the darkness inside her grew stronger, its presence like a constant pressure against her chest. The whispers were louder now, filling her head, drowning out everything else. They were promises sweet and poisonous, urging her to give in. You're not alone anymore. You have the power to make everything right. You can change the world. Her hands trembled at her sides. She could feel the energy, the raw, unbridled force of the Keeper's power, surging beneath her skin. It was all around her now, suffocating her, offering her everything she had ever wanted: control, power, the ability to make the world bend to her will. But at what cost? The man's words rang in her ears again. You don't have a choice. You've already made it. Her eyes flicked back to him, but his expression was unreadable, his eyes like dark, endless pits that seemed to see right through her. He was waiting for her to react, to make a decision. But how could she? How could she choose between the people she had once been and the power that threatened to consume her? I don't want this, she whispered, her voice trembling. The man's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. No one ever does, Sarah, but it's too late to turn back now. The Keeper's power is in you. It's a part of you. You can't run from it forever. She took a step back, her mind racing. The power inside her. It felt like it was becoming part of her very identity, like it was erasing everything else. The girl she had been was fading, slipping away with every passing second. And in her place, something darker, more dangerous was emerging. Then what do I do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with something dark and knowing. You learn to control it. You learn to wield it before it controls you. Sarah shook her head, her pulse quickening. I don't know how. I don't know if I can. You don't have a choice, he said, his voice low and firm. The longer you fight it, the more it will consume you. But if you learn to embrace it, if you learn to wield it, you can make it your own. You can be stronger than you ever imagined. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy cloak. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be the Keeper. But the power was already inside her, already changing her. She could feel it like a fire that burned within her veins, urging her to give in. You could be anything the whispers promised. You could be more than you ever dreamed. Just let go. No, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. I won't let it take me. The man's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening. You don't have a choice. You'll see. The darkness is already a part of you. It's already inside you, and it will take you whether you fight it or not. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She could feel it now, the weight of the power pressing against her chest, suffocating her. She could hear the Keeper's voice louder than ever before, like a storm that was building, gathering strength. You can't fight it, the voice whispered. You're mine. You always have been. Sarah gasped, clutching her head in her hands, trying to block out the voice, trying to hold on to whatever was left of herself. She couldn't let it take over. She couldn't let it win. But the man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, like a shadow that loomed over her. "You'll learn," he said softly, his voice like a promise. "You'll learn to wield the power, or it will consume you." With that, he turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the darkness, leaving Sarah standing alone, trembling, her body pulsing with the power that threatened to break free. For a long moment, Sarah stood there, motionless, her mind a whirlwind of fear, doubt, and desperation. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to fight the darkness inside her. But one thing was clear: she couldn't keep running. Not anymore. She had to learn to control it. She had to learn how to fight the Keeper's power before it consumed her completely. The next few days were a blur. Sarah moved through them like a ghost, her body functioning on autopilot, her mind consumed by the constant whispers of the Keeper's power. She could feel it surging inside her, a constant presence, a force that was impossible to ignore. She had tried to return to the house, to her friends, but the closer she got, the more the darkness inside her pulled her away. She couldn't risk hurting them. She couldn't risk becoming the monster she feared she was becoming. Instead, she wandered the streets, searching for answers, for a way to regain control. But every time she tried to push the power down, it fought back stronger than before. It was like a living thing inside her, feeding on her fear, her uncertainty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah found herself standing in front of a familiar building, the old church on the outskirts of town. She hadn't been here in years, but something about it called to her now, as if it held the answer she so desperately needed. She stepped inside, the heavy doors creaking as they opened. The air was cool, the scent of incense lingering in the silence. The stained glass windows cast eerie, multicolored light across the pews, and the flickering candles on the altar seemed to dance in the dim light. As she moved deeper into the church, she felt the power inside her stir, as though it recognized the place. She stopped in front of the altar, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure, a woman cloaked in darkness, her eyes glowing faintly. "You came," the woman said, her voice soft but powerful. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" The woman stepped forward, her face illuminated by the candlelight. "I am someone who understands what you're going through. I've been where you are." Sarah's mind raced. What is this? What's happening to me? The woman smiled, a knowing, almost sad smile. "You've been chosen, Sarah. Chosen to carry the Keeper's power. But you don't have to be its slave. You can learn to control it. You can learn to wield it." The words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Was this the same power the man had spoken of? Was this the key to understanding what she had become? "Tell me how," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with desperation. The woman's eyes gleamed with a strange, ancient knowledge. "The power is in you, but first you must confront it. You must face the darkness inside you and accept it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Accept it? The thought terrified her. "You must make the choice," the woman continued, her voice like a quiet murmur. "To fight it or to become it." Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the woman's words hung in the air like a suffocating fog. To fight it or to become it. The church, once a place of solace and peace, now felt like a hollow cage, its ancient stone walls closing in on her. The air was thick with the weight of the decision she had to make, a decision that would shape the rest of her life. To fight it or to become it. The words echoed in her mind, like a cruel mantra, taunting her with the impossible choice before her. She could feel the power inside her, the Keeper's dark gift, swirling like a storm just beneath the surface of her skin. It was a part of her now, inescapable, undeniable. But was it something she could control, or would it consume her entirely? The woman's gaze was unwavering, her eyes glowing with an eerie, knowing light. She stepped closer, her movements graceful but predatory, like a shadow moving through the dim light of the church. "You're afraid," the woman said softly, her voice like a whisper in the silence. "I can see it in your eyes. You're afraid of what you might become. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was true. She was terrified. Terrified of the power inside her. Terrified of what it might turn her into. But there was something else too. Something deeper, a quiet yearning to understand, to control it, to finally stop running from it. "Tell me what to do," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me how to fight it, how to stop it from taking me." The woman's lips curved into a faint smile, almost pitying. "You can't fight it, Sarah. You can't outrun it. The Keeper's power is already inside you. It has been for a long time, perhaps even before you knew it. But you have a choice. You can embrace it, let it become part of you, or you can fight it until it destroys you." Sarah shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't want to become that. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to lose myself." The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet understanding. "You don't have to lose yourself, but you have to accept the darkness. Only then will you be able to control it. Only then will you be able to shape it to your will." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of embracing the darkness, of allowing it to fully take hold of her, was terrifying. But the thought of losing herself completely, of letting it consume her without understanding it, was even worse. The woman took another step forward, her presence overwhelming. "I was once like you," she said, her voice low and steady. "I fought the darkness, thinking I could outrun it. But it doesn't work that way. The more you resist, the stronger it becomes. You must learn to wield it. You must learn to become it." Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the power surging inside her, clawing at her, begging for release. It was like a living thing, a beast that wanted to be set free. But what would she become if she let it out? What would she lose in the process? "What happens if I don't?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens if I keep fighting it?" The woman's eyes gleamed with a dark, knowing light. "Then it will destroy you, piece by piece. It will tear you apart from the inside out, until there's nothing left of you but the power. And when that happens, you will become a puppet, a slave to the Keeper's will." Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. She had seen the aftermath of the Keeper's influence. She had seen the woman in the street, the one who had come before her, consumed by the darkness. She had seen the fear in her eyes, the hopelessness, the way she had lost herself to the power. I can't be like that," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. The woman's gaze softened, but there was no pity in it, only understanding. "You don't have to be, but you must choose, Sarah. You must choose who you want to be." For a long moment, Sarah stood there, her mind racing, her heart torn between fear and the strange, intoxicating pull of the power inside her. She could feel it now, pressing against her, like a tide rising inside her chest, threatening to drown her. "Embrace it," the voice whispered, soft and insistent. "You can control it. You could be its master." But Sarah wasn't sure if she believed it. She wasn't sure if she could ever control it. The power was too wild, too chaotic. It was like trying to tame a storm. "I don't know if I can," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." The woman's smile was small, almost sad. "You are stronger than you think, but you will never know how strong until you let go, until you stop fighting it." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she closed her eyes, her mind swirling with doubt and fear. Could she really do this? Could she truly embrace the darkness inside her without losing herself? "You can." The voice inside her was louder now, more insistent. "You are the Keeper. You are the power. You are the one who will change everything." She opened her eyes and looked at the woman standing before her. She had no answers, no easy way forward. But one thing was clear: the choice was hers, and the consequences of that choice would echo through the rest of her life. "I don't know if I can control it," Sarah said, her voice steadying, "but I won't let it control me." The woman's eyes gleamed with something like approval. "Then you've already made your choice." The power surged within Sarah like a wave crashing against a shore. She could feel it, feel the darkness swirling around her, tempting her, testing her resolve. But she held firm. She wasn't going to give in. "Not yet. You're not alone," the woman said, her voice softer now. There are others like you, others who have embraced the power, who have learned to control it. You can find them if you're willing to learn. Sarah nodded, her mind still reeling. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't keep running. She had to face the darkness, confront it, and find a way to control it before it consumed her completely. With a final glance at the woman, Sarah turned and walked out of the church, her footsteps heavy but determined. The night air was cool against her skin, the world around her still and silent. But she could feel the power inside her, pulsing with life, waiting for her to make her next move. She had chosen a fight. Now, she had to learn how to wield the darkness, and she would do whatever it took to control it. The days following Sarah's decision were a blur of confusion and fear, but also something else, a quiet, simmering determination. She had chosen to fight the darkness, to learn to control it, but every moment felt like a test. The power inside her was like a wild, untamed animal, constantly testing her resolve, pushing her to the edge of what she could endure. It was late one night when the dreams started. They were vivid, more real than anything she had ever experienced before. Each time she closed her eyes, she was pulled into a different world, a world that felt like a reflection of her own, but twisted, distorted, as if reality itself was bending around her. In these dreams, she was no longer Sarah, the girl who had once lived a normal life. She was something else entirely, a shadow, a presence, a force of nature. And the power inside her was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar, a storm that she couldn't control. It surged through her, filling her with a dark hunger, a need to destroy, to reshape the world in her image. But in every dream, there was a choice to give in, to embrace the power fully, to become the keeper in every sense of the word. And every time she resisted, she fought against the pull of the darkness, even as it clawed at her from within. The dreams were always the same. Her standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss, the darkness swirling beneath her feet. He could feel the power beckoning, calling to her, urging her to step forward, to leap into the unknown. But each time, she held back, afraid of what would happen if she let go. The dreams left her exhausted, drenched in sweat, her mind spinning. He knew they were a reflection of the battle inside her, of the war between the girl she had been and the force that was slowly taking over her. But she couldn't afford to lose herself. Not yet. It was late afternoon when Sarah finally decided to leave the house. She had been hiding out in her room for days, too afraid to face the world, too afraid to confront what she had become. But the pressure inside her was unbearable now, the whispers of the power growing louder. With every passing minute, she needed to find answers. She needed to understand what was happening to her. The streets outside were quiet, the air heavy with the promise of rain. The city felt different now, as though the world itself had shifted, and Sarah was no longer sure where she fit in it. People passed by her without noticing, their faces blurring into the background, as though she no longer belonged to their world. Her feet carried her without thinking, drawing her toward the outskirts of town. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the noise, away from the pressure of the power that was constantly pressing in on her. She walked for hours, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear, until she found herself standing in front of a small, dilapidated building on the edge of town. It was an old library, one she remembered from her childhood. It had been abandoned for years, its windows dark and broken, its door hanging off its hinges. But something about it called to her. She stepped inside, the air musty and stale, the scent of old paper and dust filling her lungs. The interior was as forgotten as the outside, shelves of books stacked haphazardly, their spines faded and torn. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. She wandered through the aisles, her fingers brushing against the spines of the books, searching for something, anything, that might offer her a clue. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she had a feeling that the answers were here, hidden among the forgotten pages. It wasn't until she reached the back of the library that she found it, a small, dusty tome, its cover cracked and worn. The title was barely legible, the letters faded with age. But something about it felt familiar. Sarah pulled it from the shelf, her hands trembling as she opened it. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough to read. They spoke of the Keeper, of the ancient power that had been passed down through the ages, and of the price that came with it. She read on, her heart racing as she learned of the rituals, the sacrifices, the dark bargains that had been made to harness the power of the Keeper. It was a power that could reshape the world, but at a cost. The more one embraced it, the more they lost themselves. The darkness consumed everything it touched, until there was nothing left but the power itself. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she turned the page. There, written in the margins, were words that made her blood run cold. The Keeper cannot be controlled. The Keeper is the darkness, and the darkness always wins. She slammed the book shut, her mind reeling. She had known that the power was dangerous, but this was something else entirely. The Keeper wasn't just a force of nature. It was a living, breathing entity, a parasite that fed on its host until there was nothing left. And the more she read, the clearer it became. There was no way out. Once the Keeper's power took hold, it was impossible to escape. The darkness would consume her, piece by piece, until she was nothing but a vessel for its will. Sarah stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't breathe. The words on the page echoed in her mind, relentless and unforgiving. She had made a choice. She had chosen to fight the darkness, to control it. But what if she couldn't? What if, in the end, the darkness controlled her? What if I'm already lost? The question haunted her as she stood in the silence of the library, the weight of her decision crashing down on her. She had been warned. She had been told that there was no escape. But she couldn't know, she wouldn't believe it. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when she was so close. She had to find a way to master the power, to control it before it consumed her completely. But deep down, in the pit of her stomach, she knew one thing for sure. The price of mastery was far greater than she had ever imagined. The night after Sarah's discovery in the library was one of restless torment. Her mind refused to settle, the words she had read spinning endlessly in her thoughts. The Keeper cannot be controlled. The Keeper is the darkness, and the darkness always wins. She had tried to sleep, tried to find some semblance of peace, but the dreams had returned, more vivid and more real than before. This time, she wasn't just standing at the edge of the abyss. She was falling, plunging into the void with no way to stop herself. The darkness wrapped around her like a suffocating shroud, its tendrils reaching for her, pulling her deeper into its grip. But there was something new in the dream this time. A presence, a voice, soft and insistent, whispering to her in the darkness. You cannot escape. You are mine now. Sarah woke with a start, gasping for air, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was dark, silent, but she could still feel it, the presence, the weight of the power inside her, pressing against her skin, clawing at her from within. She sat up, her hands shaking as she tried to steady her breath. She couldn't keep running from this. She couldn't keep pretending that everything would be okay. The darkness was a part of her now, and no matter how much she tried to fight it, it was never going to let her go. The question remained, could she control it? Could she master it before it consumed her entirely? The next morning, Sarah found herself at the edge of town again, her feet carrying her toward the forest that lay beyond the city limits. She didn't know why she was drawn to it, but something inside her whispered that the answers she needed were out there, hidden among the trees. As she walked deeper into the forest, the world around her grew quieter. The usual sounds of the city, distant traffic, the hum of life, faded away, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of birds. The air felt different here, heavy with the scent of pine and earth, but also something else, something older, something that resonated with the power inside her. She walked for what felt like hours, until the trees began to thin and the ground beneath her feet grew uneven. It was here, in the heart of the forest, that she found it. A stone circle. The stones were ancient, their surfaces weathered by time, but they stood tall and proud, arranged in a perfect circle around a small clearing. The air was thick with an energy she couldn't explain, a palpable force that seemed to hum with life. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet was alive, pulsing with a power that matched the darkness inside her. Sarah approached the circle cautiously, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the power calling to her, tugging at her from within, urging her to step closer, to embrace it. But she hesitated. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do here, or why she had come. But the answer came to her all the same. The stone circle wasn't just a place. It was a portal. She could feel it now. The pull of the energy, the way the stones seemed to shimmer with a faint, otherworldly light. This was no ordinary place. This was a place of power, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. And as she stood at the edge of the circle, she realized that it wasn't just the Keeper's power that had brought her here. It was something else, something older, something that had been waiting for her. She stepped forward, her foot crossing the threshold of the circle. The moment she did, the air around her seemed to crackle with energy, and the ground beneath her feet shifted. The power inside her surged, reacting to the energy in the stones, and she felt her pulse quicken as she was pulled deeper into the circle. A voice echoed in her mind, familiar and cold. You've come to seek answers, but what you find may not be what you want. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice. It was the same voice that had whispered to her in the darkness of her dreams. The same voice that had called her to this place. Who are you? She demanded, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. The reply was slow, deliberate, as if the presence was savoring her confusion. I'm the one who has been waiting for you to awaken. The words sent a chill through her, and she could feel the darkness within her stir, as if recognizing the presence, as if it knew this voice. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What I want is for you to understand the truth of what you are, the truth of what you have become. The stones around her seemed to pulse in rhythm with the beat of her heart, and the world around her began to fade. The trees, the sky, the earth, they all blurred into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. And in that moment she saw it. A vision of herself, standing at the center of a vast, swirling darkness, her hands outstretched as the power flowed through her. But there was something wrong, something twisted about the image. The power that she had thought she could control was consuming her, bending her to its will. Her eyes were empty, hollow, her face twisted in agony. This is what will happen to you, the voice said, its tone laced with an eerie calm. This is the fate of every keeper. The darkness will claim you, just as it has claimed all who came before you. Sarah staggered back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The vision faded, but the feeling remained, the weight of the truth, the crushing certainty that there was no escaping the darkness. But as the vision faded, something else remained, a spark of defiance, a flicker of hope. He wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to let the darkness win. I won't let you take me, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her stomach. I will control it. I will master it. The voice laughed, low and mocking. You cannot control what you are. You cannot control the darkness. But you can embrace it. You can become one with it. Sarah shook her head, her hands clenched into fists. He could feel the power surging within her. But this time, she didn't fear it. He embraced it. She would not become the puppet of the darkness. She would make it her own. I will not become you, she said, her voice firm. I will make my own path. The world around her seemed to shudder, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to her will. The power inside her roared, but she held it in check, her resolve stronger than ever. For the first time since the darkness had taken root within her, Sarah felt in control. She wasn't sure how long it would last, or what the consequences would be, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to give in. Not now. Not ever. The forest was still when Sarah stepped away from the stone circle, the echo of the voice lingering in her mind like a faint, bitter taste. The air had returned to its normal stillness, but Sarah felt different, changed. She had faced the truth of what she was becoming, and while the darkness still clawed at her from within, she felt a new sense of determination take root. The vision of herself, consumed by the power, was still fresh in her mind, but she refused to let it define her. She had seen what could happen if she gave in, if she allowed the Keeper's power to control her. But she wasn't going to let that happen. She would fight. She would master the darkness. As she walked back through the forest, the trees seemed to close in around her, their branches swaying in the wind like silent sentinels. The weight of the power inside her was undeniable, but it no longer felt like an uncontrollable force. It felt like a tool, a weapon she could wield. But the question remained, how much control could she truly have? The path back to the town was long and winding, but Sarah's mind was focused. She had made her choice. She would learn to control the darkness, to harness its power without succumbing to it. But she had no illusions about the difficulty of the task ahead. The price of mastery was steep, and she could feel the weight of that price pressing down on her shoulders. Days passed, and Sarah's training began in earnest. She had no teacher, no guide, only her own instincts and the knowledge she had gathered from the ancient texts in the library. She spent hours each day in the solitude of her room, focusing on the power within her, trying to understand its rhythms, its ebb and flow. It was a delicate dance, one that required all her concentration. Every time she felt the power surge within her, threatening to overwhelm her, she fought it back, forcing it to bend to her will. But the darkness was relentless. It tested her at every turn, pushing her to the brink of her control. She could feel its whispers, the pull of its hunger, urging her to give in, to embrace it fully. And every time, she resisted, but the strain was taking its toll. She could feel herself growing weaker, her resolve beginning to fray at the edges. One evening, after hours of meditation, Sarah collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling from the strain. The power inside her was a constant pressure, like a weight pressing down on her chest, and it was becoming harder and harder to keep it in check. She closed her eyes, her mind spinning, and that's when it happened. A voice, deep and resonant, filled her mind. "You cannot win, Sarah." The voice was familiar, but this time, it was not the cold, mocking presence she had encountered in the forest. This voice was different, soothing, almost seductive, like a lullaby. It wrapped around her, filling her with a strange sense of comfort. "You are not meant to fight me. You are meant to be me." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to stay grounded. She couldn't let this voice take her. She couldn't let the darkness consume her. "You will never be free of me," the voice continued, its tone gentle but insistent. "I am a part of you. I am in your blood, in your bones. You cannot escape me." Sarah's breath quickened, her hands shaking as she gripped the floor beneath her. The power inside her surged, threatening to break free. It was so strong now, so overwhelming, and she could feel herself slipping. The darkness was closing in, wrapping around her like a suffocating cocoon. But then, something inside her snapped. "No!" The word echoed in her mind, louder than anything the voice had said. It was a declaration, a refusal. She was not going to give in. She was not going to let the darkness win. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah focused on the power inside her, forcing it back, pushing it into submission. The voice screamed in protest, but Sarah's resolve was stronger. She would not let herself be consumed. Not yet. The darkness receded, just for a moment, and Sarah took a shuddering breath. She had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. The darkness would never stop testing her, never stop trying to break her. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't afford to. The following days were a blur of exhaustion and frustration. Every time Sarah thought she had a handle on the power, it would slip from her grasp, as though it were mocking her attempts to control it. She began to question whether she was truly capable of mastering the darkness, or if the price of doing so was too high. It was on the 5th day after her struggle with the voice that she received an unexpected visitor. She was sitting in the small kitchen of her apartment, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, when there was a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She stood, hesitated for a moment, and then opened the door. Standing in front of her was a woman, tall, with dark, piercing eyes and a presence that seemed to fill the doorway. Her face was both familiar and foreign, like someone Sarah had seen in a dream. "Sarah," the woman said, her voice calm, but with an underlying tension. "I've been looking for you." Sarah's heart raced. There was something about the woman's presence that unsettled her, something that felt both comforting and dangerous. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the unease that coiled in her stomach. The woman smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm someone who can help you." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Help me? With what?" The woman stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Sarah's. "You're struggling, aren't you? You can feel the darkness inside you, can't you? It's a part of you now, but it doesn't have to control you. I can teach you how to harness it. I can show you how to truly master it." Sarah's pulse quickened. She had been trying to do this on her own, but the woman's words, so calm, so certain, tempted her. "Who are you really?" Sarah repeated, her voice hardening. The woman's smile faded, and she stepped closer, her eyes darkening. "I am someone who knows the price of control, and I am here to offer you a way to stop fighting, to stop struggling. You don't have to resist anymore. You can join us." Sarah's mind raced. Join us? She could feel the darkness inside her stir at the woman's words, as if it recognized something in her, something she didn't yet understand. But she wasn't ready. "Not yet. I don't need your help," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I'll do this on my own." The woman's smile returned, but this time it was cold. "We'll see, Sarah. We'll see how long you can keep fighting." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman's visit lingered in Sarah's mind for days. Her words echoed in Sarah's thoughts, a constant reminder of the choice that lay before her. She could continue fighting, continue struggling to control the darkness, or she could accept the woman's offer and join whatever she represented. Sarah tried to focus on her training, on mastering the power that had taken root inside her, but it was difficult to shake the feeling that something was closing in on her. The darkness had always been there, a constant presence, but now it seemed different, more insistent, more eager. It was as if the power itself was aware of the woman's offer and was pushing Sarah toward it, urging her to give in. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the woman's face, her smile cold and knowing. "We'll see how long you can keep fighting." The words were a taunt, a challenge, but they also held a promise. A promise of release from the constant battle, from the suffocating weight of the power inside her. But Sarah wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. She spent the next few days in the library, poring over the ancient texts she had uncovered. There had to be something in them, some way to control the darkness, to master it without becoming a slave to it. But the more she read, the more she realized how little she truly understood. The text spoke of the Keeper, of the power that resided within the Chosen, but they offered no answers, only warnings. The warnings were becoming clearer now. Every page, every word seemed to carry a hidden message. You cannot control what you have become. The darkness will consume you. The Keeper is always bound to the shadows. Sarah slammed the book shut, frustration boiling inside her. She couldn't accept that. She couldn't believe that there was no way out, no way to make this power her own without losing herself in the process. She wasn't like the others. She couldn't be. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She needed air. She needed to clear her mind. The sun was setting as Sarah walked through the quiet streets of the town, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. The world around her seemed to be in a state of suspended animation, peaceful, serene, but with an undercurrent of tension. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She wandered through the familiar streets, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The woman's words, the darkness inside her, the vision she had seen in the stone circle. Everything was starting to blur together, and Sarah felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to jump or turn back. As she walked, she passed by the old church on the edge of town. The church had always been a place of quiet reflection for her, a sanctuary where she could escape the chaos of her mind. But tonight it felt different. The air around it was thick, charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. Without thinking, she pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The church was empty, save for the faint glow of candles flickering in the corners. The stone walls seemed to absorb the light, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Sarah walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She felt drawn to the altar, as if something were calling her. She reached the front of the church and stood before the altar, her eyes scanning the worn stone surface. There was something about this place, something ancient and powerful. It was as if the church itself held secrets that had been buried for centuries. As she reached out to touch the altar, a sudden chill ran through her body, and the air around her seemed to grow heavier. The darkness inside her stirred, responding to the energy in the room. She could feel it, the pull of something ancient, something that had been waiting for her. And then, as if the church itself had awakened, the air crackled with energy. A voice, low and reverberating, filled the space around her. Sarah. Her heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar, but not the voice of the woman from before. This voice was deeper, older, and it seemed to come from the very walls of the church. You are close now. You can feel it, can't you? The power that lies beneath the surface. The power that has always been with you. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The darkness was rising within her, responding to the voice, to the call. It was stronger now, more insistent, and she could feel its hunger, its need to consume. You cannot fight it forever, the voice continued. You are meant for this. You are meant to embrace the darkness. Let it consume you, and you will be more powerful than you can imagine. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the altar, trying to steady herself. The power inside her was surging, threatening to overwhelm her, but she couldn't let it take control. She couldn't let herself become what the voice wanted her to be. No, she whispered, her voice shaking. I will not give in. The voice chuckled softly, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very air around her. You think you have a choice? It asked. You are already mine. The darkness is in your blood. It is in your soul. You cannot escape it. The words echoed in her mind, and she could feel the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. It was suffocating, overwhelming, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might give in. She thought she might let it consume her, let it take her over completely. But then something inside her snapped. I choose my own path, Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the terror that threatened to rise within her. I will not be your puppet. I will control this power. I will not let it control me. The voice fell silent, and the energy in the room seemed to dissipate, leaving Sarah standing alone in the dim light of the church. She felt drained, as if the very force of her resistance had taken everything from her. But she also felt something else, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of strength. She had made her choice. She would not give in to the darkness. She would master it or die trying. As Sarah left the church, the weight of her decision hung heavy in the air. The darkness was still inside her, still clawing at the edges of her mind, but she had proven something to herself. She had resisted, for now, but the woman's words and the voice in the church lingered in her mind. They were not the only forces vying for control over her. There were others who knew the true nature of the darkness, who understood its power, and they were watching her. Sarah wasn't sure what her next move would be, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone in this fight. Sarah had never felt more alone. As the days passed, she tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. She went to work at the small bookstore in town, greeted customers with a forced smile, and tried to maintain a routine. But the darkness inside her, the power that had begun to consume her, was always there, lurking beneath the surface. It wasn't just a presence anymore. It was a constant hum, a pulse, a reminder of the choice she had made. She had resisted the temptation of the voices in the church, but she knew the fight wasn't over. She could feel it, the weight of what she was becoming, the inevitability of it. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the woman's face, the cold smile, the promise of power. She could almost hear the voice calling to her again, urging her to embrace the darkness fully. But she couldn't. Not yet. She wouldn't let herself become what they wanted her to be. One afternoon, as she was shelving a new stack of books in the back of the store, the doorbell rang. She turned, expecting another customer, but froze when she saw who had entered. It was the woman from the church. Her presence filled the room, as if the air itself had thickened with her arrival. She was dressed in dark, flowing clothes, her eyes glinting with something unreadable. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively stepped back, her hands trembling. "You've been avoiding me," the woman said, her voice smooth like silk. "But you can't avoid what's coming, Sarah. It's inevitable." Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't expected the woman to find her here, not so soon. "What do you want?" The woman smiled a small, knowing smile. "I want you to stop fighting. I want you to join us. We can help you, Sarah. We can teach you how to control the power inside you, how to master it, instead of letting it control you." "I don't need your help," Sarah replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "I'm not like you. I won't give in to the darkness." The woman's smile faltered for just a moment, but then she stepped closer, her gaze never leaving Sarah's. "You already have, haven't you? The power is inside you. You can feel it. It's a part of you now. You can't deny it forever." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The woman was right in a way. The darkness was inside her, and it was growing stronger every day. But that didn't mean she had to give in to it. She wouldn't. She couldn't. "I won't join you," Sarah said, her voice shaking with determination. "I will control this power on my own. I don't need you." The woman's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw something dangerous flash across her face. But then, just as quickly, the woman's expression softened, and she took a step back. "Very well," she said, her voice cold now. "But know this, Sarah, you're not alone in this. Others are watching you. They will come for you, whether you are ready or not. And when they do, you will have no choice but to make a decision. The darkness will consume you, or you will learn to wield it." With that, the woman turned and walked out of the bookstore, leaving Sarah standing there, her heart racing. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. The woman's words kept echoing in her head. "Others are watching you." Who were these others? And what did they want from her? Sarah had always known that the darkness was a dangerous force, but now it seemed that there were others who understood it, who knew how to wield it. She wasn't the only one with this power. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had always felt like an outsider, like something about her was different, but now the weight of that difference was starting to sink in. She wasn't just a girl struggling with a dark power inside her. She was part of something much larger, something much more dangerous. She had to know more. The next morning, Sarah decided to take action. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. She spent the entire day combing through the books in the store, searching for anything that might explain what was happening to her. She found nothing useful, just more vague references to the Keeper, to the darkness, to the ancient powers that had been forgotten by most of the world. It was all so cryptic, so elusive. It was as if the answers she sought had been deliberately hidden. But then, in the farthest corner of the store, tucked behind a shelf of old, dusty tomes, Sarah found something that caught her eye. It was a small, leather-bound book, its cover cracked and worn. The title was barely legible, faded with age, but Sarah could just make out the word convergence. She pulled it from the shelf and opened it, the pages yellowed and fragile. The book seemed to hum with an energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She began to read, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. What she found shook her to the core. The book spoke of an ancient order, a group of individuals who had been chosen to wield the darkness. They were called the Convergence, and their purpose was to maintain balance between the light and the shadows. But over time, the order had fallen into chaos. Some members had embraced the darkness completely, becoming twisted versions of themselves, while others had sought to destroy it entirely. The book also mentioned a ritual, one that would allow the wielder of the darkness to either embrace it fully or reject it forever. The ritual was dangerous, and only those who were truly ready could survive it. But there was a catch. The ritual required a sacrifice, a life. The life of someone close to the wielder. Sarah's heart stopped. A sacrifice. She had always known that power came with a price, but she had never imagined it would be this high. She turned the page, her hands trembling. The next section was written in a language she didn't recognize, but the words seemed to burn themselves into her mind. As she read them, she felt a surge of power rise within her, a hunger, an urge to do something, anything, to make the power hers. She slammed the book shut, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to get control of herself. She couldn't let the darkness take over. Not now, not ever. But she knew, deep down, that the choice was coming. Soon, she would have to decide whether to embrace the darkness or let it consume her. And the price of that decision would be far higher than she could ever imagine. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and fear. Sarah couldn't shake the images from the book, the ritual, the sacrifice, the terrifying power that awaited her if she chose to embrace the darkness. The weight of what she had learned pressed down on her, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The darkness was growing inside her, pushing against her will, urging her to give in. It was like a hunger that could never be satisfied, a gnawing, relentless need that she couldn't escape. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the swirling shadows, the whispers calling her name, promising her unimaginable power if only she would accept it. But Sarah knew better than to listen to those promises. She had seen what happened to those who gave in, seen the twisted versions of themselves that were left behind. She couldn't allow that to happen to her. She wouldn't. Still, the choice weighed heavily on her. The ritual, the sacrifice, the price of power, and the woman, the one who had warned her, who had tried to lure her into the darkness, had been right about one thing. Sarah wasn't alone in this. There were others who understood what she was going through, who knew the true nature of the darkness, and they were watching her. That night, as Sarah sat alone in her small apartment, a knock at the door shattered the silence. Her heart skipped a beat, and she instinctively stood up, her mind racing. Who could it be at this hour? She approached the door cautiously, her hand hovering over the handle. The shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch unnaturally, and a chill ran through her, as if the darkness itself were reaching out to her. She opened the door slowly. Standing on the other side was a man, tall and imposing, dressed in a long, dark coat. His eyes were a piercing shade of gray, almost silver, and they seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the hallway. There was something unsettling about him, something that made Sarah's skin crawl. "I know what you are," he said, his voice low and calm, "and I know what you're afraid of." Sarah took a step back, her pulse quickening. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room as if he had been here before. He moved with an unsettling grace, as if the shadows themselves parted to make way for him. "I am someone who understands the power you carry," he said, turning to face her, "and I'm here to offer you a choice." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard that word before, choice. It was the same word the woman had used, the same word the book had warned her about. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was a smile that held no warmth. "I don't want anything from you, Sarah. I'm offering you a chance to make the right decision. The ritual is near. You know this. The darkness inside you is growing stronger. You can either embrace it, take control, and join us, or you can let it consume you. The choice is yours." Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. She had been hoping to avoid this, to find another way, But now the truth was staring her in the face. The ritual, the sacrifice, it was all coming for her, whether she was ready or not. "You're one of them, aren't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Yes, I am one of the convergents, and I'm here to help you, to guide you through what's coming." "I don't want your help," Sarah spat, her fists clenching at her sides. "I won't join you." The man's expression darkened, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. But just as quickly, his demeanor shifted, and he took a step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Very well," he said, his voice colder now. "But remember this, Sarah, the darkness will not wait for you. It will not be patient, and when it comes for you, you will have no choice but to face it. You may think you have time, but you don't." With that, he turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Sarah standing there, her breath shallow, her heart racing. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. The man's words echoed in her mind, and she could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to make a decision that would shape the rest of her life. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was no escaping it. The darkness was a part of her now. It had always been there, lurking in the background, waiting for its chance to rise. She had tried to fight it, to control it, but the longer she resisted, the more it seemed to claw at her from the inside. She had to face it. She had to make the choice. The next day, Sarah returned to the church. It was the only place where she felt even a semblance of peace. The only place where she could think clearly. She stood in the empty pews, staring at the altar, her mind swirling with the possibilities. She had come here for answers, but the answers were not clear. The ritual, the sacrifice, was it all just a way for the darkness to claim her? Or was there another path, another way to break free from its hold? She didn't know, but she did know one thing. The darkness was coming, and when it did, she would have to choose. That evening, Sarah stood before the altar again, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The shadows in the church seemed to grow deeper, darker, as if they were alive, watching her, waiting. And then for the first time, she felt it at the pull. The darkness inside her stirred, responding to the call. It was a hunger, an insatiable need, and it wanted to be fed. "Embrace me," it whispered. "Join me, and together we will be unstoppable." Sarah closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the altar. She could feel the power coursing through her, the shadows licking at her fingertips, urging her to give in. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Not yet. The days felt like they were slipping through Sarah's fingers, each one blurring into the next as the pressure to make a choice grew heavier. The darkness inside her was no longer a mere presence. It was a constant companion, a force that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. It was becoming harder to ignore, harder to suppress. And the voices, the whispers that had been distant, were now growing louder, more insistent. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't focus. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shadows closing in, felt the power thrumming just beneath her skin, waiting to be unleashed. The temptation was overwhelming, but Sarah had promised herself that she wouldn't give in. Not yet. She couldn't. It was late one night when Sarah decided to visit the old stone circle again. The place had become a kind of sanctuary for her, a place where she could feel the connection between the darkness inside her and the ancient power that seemed to linger in the air. The moon was full, casting a pale light over the stones, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. As she stepped into the circle, she felt the familiar tug of the shadows, the pull of something ancient and powerful. The darkness inside her stirred, responding to the energy in the air. It was as if the very earth itself was alive, waiting for her to make a decision. She stood there for a long time, her eyes closed, her breath steady. She could feel the weight of the power pressing against her, urging her to embrace it, to let it consume her. But she resisted. She had to. She had no idea how much longer she could hold on, but she had to try. She couldn't let herself become one of them, one of the twisted souls who had embraced the darkness fully. She couldn't let herself be consumed. But then, as if summoned by her thoughts, she heard a voice. It was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight of authority that made her blood run cold. You think you can fight this forever? Sarah's eyes snapped open, and she turned to see the woman standing just beyond the stone circle. The same woman who had visited her in the bookstore, the one who had promised her power she would join them. Her cold smile was there again, but this time it was tinged with something darker, something predatory. You're wasting your time, the woman said, her voice soft but carrying an unmistakable edge. The darkness is inside you. It's always been inside you. You can't outrun it, Sarah. You can't fight it forever. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. I don't need your help, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I won't join you. I won't give in to this. The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You don't have a choice. The ritual is already in motion. The sacrifice is already chosen. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? The woman's smile widened, cruel and knowing. You think you can control the darkness, but it's already controlling you. And when the time comes, you'll have to make the ultimate decision. You'll have to decide who you're willing to lose. Sarah's mind raced. The ritual, the sacrifice. She had known there would be a price, but she hadn't realized just how high it would be. Who would she have to sacrifice? And why? You can't stop it, the woman continued, her voice a soft, mocking lilt. The darkness is coming for you, Sarah, and when it does, you'll have no choice but to give in, or lose everything. The woman's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine, and for a moment, she was paralyzed with fear. She had always known that the darkness inside her came with a cost, but now the true extent of that cost was becoming clear. The woman took a step back, her gaze never leaving Sarah's. You're running out of time, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Make your choice, Sarah, before it's too late. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the woman turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Sarah standing alone in the stone circle, her heart racing. The next few days were a blur of confusion and dread. Sarah couldn't shake the woman's words, couldn't stop thinking about the sacrifice that was coming. Who would she have to lose? And why? The darkness was inside her. Yes, but what did that really mean? Was she truly bound to it? Was there no way to escape? She spent hours searching through the books she had collected, desperate for answers. But the more she read, the more questions arose. The convergence, the ritual, the sacrifice, it was all so tangled, so cryptic. Every answer led to more uncertainty. But there was one thing she knew for certain. The time was coming. The darkness was drawing near, and she would have to make a choice. That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, staring at the small, leather-bound book that had started it all, the book on the convergence. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the pages, and her mind raced with the possibilities. She had to make a decision, but she didn't know if she was ready. The darkness inside her was growing stronger, more insistent. She could feel it clawing at her, whispering in her mind, urging her to give in, to embrace it fully. But she couldn't. Not yet. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Who could it be at this hour? She stood up, her hands trembling as she approached the door. She opened it cautiously. Standing there, in the dim light of the hallway, was the man she had met before, the one who had claimed to be part of the convergence. His silver-gray eyes glinted in the darkness, and his presence filled the space, as if the shadows themselves had gathered around him. You've been avoiding me, he said, his voice smooth and unyielding. Sarah swallowed, trying to steady herself. What do you want? The man stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm here to offer you a final chance. You've made your choice, but the time is running out. The ritual is already in motion. You have no control over it anymore. Sarah's pulse quickened. What do you mean? What ritual? The one that will decide your fate, the man replied. The darkness is coming for you, and when it does, you'll have to decide who you are willing to sacrifice to gain control over it. Sarah's mind reeled. The ritual, the sacrifice. The man's words hung heavy in the air, suffocating her with their meaning. "I don't want to lose anyone," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man's expression softened, just for a moment, before his eyes hardened again. "You don't have a choice. The ritual is already in motion, and you will have to make a decision. Soon." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of her choices. The silence in Sarah's apartment felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. The man's words echoed in her mind, relentless and cold. The ritual is already in motion. She had tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that there was still time to figure things out. But the truth was undeniable. The darkness inside her was no longer a distant threat. It was a part of her now, growing stronger with every passing day. And the price she would have to pay for that power was becoming clearer. She didn't know who or what she was supposed to sacrifice, but she knew one thing for certain. Someone was going to suffer. The thought made her stomach twist, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was no escaping it. The next day, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the stone circle once more. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the weight of something ancient. The darkness inside her stirred, responding to the energy in the air, and for a moment, she felt an overwhelming urge to step forward, to embrace the shadows and let them consume her. But she resisted. Instead, she sank to her knees in the center of the circle, her hands trembling as she pressed them to the cold stone beneath her. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, trying to quiet the storm that raged within her. The question lingered in her mind, unanswered. She had no guide, no mentor. The book had given her only fragments of information, and the people she had encountered, the man, the woman, had only offered cryptic warnings. No one had told her what to do, how to control the darkness without losing herself. The wind picked up, and for a moment, Sarah thought she heard something, a whisper, soft and distant. It was like a voice calling her name, familiar and comforting. Sarah, her heart skipped a beat. She opened her eyes, but there was no one there. Sarah. The voice was closer now, and she realized with a chill that it wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from inside her. The darkness was speaking to her. Back in her apartment that evening, Sarah sat in the dim light, staring at the book once more. The pages were worn, the ink faded in places, but she had memorized every word, every symbol. She had spent hours poring over it, trying to understand what was coming. The ritual, the sacrifice, the power. She was running out of time, and she knew it. The darkness inside her was growing more insistent, clawing at her mind, urging her to take control, to claim what was rightfully hers. But at what cost? She had thought about it, thought about the people in her life, the ones she cared about. But the more she thought, the more she realized that the darkness didn't care about her emotions. It didn't care about her connections to others. It only cared about its own hunger, its own need to consume, and she was its vessel. That night, Sarah dreamt of the stone circle again. The wind howled around her, and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, swirling in the darkness. She was standing at the center of the circle, but this time, she wasn't alone. The woman from the bookstore was there, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. She stepped towards Sarah, her smile wide and cruel. "You can feel it, can't you?" the woman said, her voice low and melodic. "The darkness inside you. It's growing stronger, just as we knew it would." Sarah tried to speak, but no words came. The woman's presence was overwhelming, suffocating, and Sarah felt a cold, creeping fear settle deep in her bones. "You think you can fight it," the woman continued, "but you're not strong enough. You never were. The ritual is upon you. The choice is coming, and you'll have to decide. Who will you sacrifice?" Sarah tried to move, but her legs felt heavy, as if they were trapped in the very earth beneath her. The shadows closed in, and the woman's eyes seemed to burn with a terrible light. "Don't fight it," the woman whispered, her voice like a lullaby. "Embrace it. Accept your fate. You'll be powerful beyond imagining." "No," Sarah gasped, her breath ragged. "I won't let you control me." The woman's smile faltered, and for a moment, there was something almost human in her expression, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You'll see," the woman said, her voice now laced with a cruel finality. "You'll see that you have no choice." And with that, the woman disappeared into the shadows, leaving Sarah alone in the circle, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Sarah awoke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The dream had been so vivid, so real, that it took her a moment to realize it was just that, a dream. But the feeling of dread lingered, settling like a weight on her chest. The darkness was coming for her. The ritual was drawing near, and no matter how much she resisted, she knew that the time to make a choice was fast approaching. The next day, Sarah went to the church again. The familiar stone walls offered some comfort, but it was fleeting. She could feel the darkness lurking inside her, waiting, always waiting. She couldn't escape it. As she entered the quiet sanctuary, she noticed someone sitting at the back of the church, an older man, his face lined with age and wisdom. He was dressed in simple clothes, but there was something about him that made him stand out. He was staring at her, his eyes intense and knowing. Sarah hesitated for a moment before walking toward him. She had no idea who he was, but something about his presence made her feel like he had answers. "You're struggling," the man said, his voice calm and gentle. "I can see it in your eyes. The darkness inside you is calling, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop it." The man studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. "You can't stop it. Not completely. But you can control it. You can choose how to use it. It's a part of you now, but that doesn't mean you have to let it define you." "How?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "How do I control it? How do I make it stop?" The man smiled faintly, but there was no humor in his eyes. "You can't make it stop, but you can choose who you become. The ritual is a path, but it's not the only path. You have a choice. You always have." Sarah's heart raced. The words felt like a lifeline, but they also felt like a trap. She had no idea what the man meant, but she knew that she couldn't ignore his warning. "The darkness will come for you, Sarah," the man said softly. "But you must decide if you will face it head-on or let it consume you. The choice is yours, and the price will be great." The church felt colder now, its once comforting stone walls closing in on Sarah as the man's words echoed in her mind. You can choose who you become. But how? How could she make a choice when the very darkness inside her was so powerful, so insistent? Every day, it felt like it was growing stronger, like it was becoming harder to ignore. She had tried to push it down, tried to pretend it wasn't there, but it was always waiting, always whispering in the back of her mind. The man's cryptic words gave her no answers, only more questions. You can control it. You can choose how to use it. But control it how? She had no idea what that even meant. And what if she couldn't? What if the darkness consumed her before she had the chance to figure it out? The days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next. Sarah couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. She found herself pacing the apartment, her thoughts racing. The darkness was always there, lurking beneath the surface, pushing her towards something she didn't understand. She couldn't ignore it anymore. It was too strong, too overwhelming. And then one night it happened. She was standing in front of the mirror, her hands trembling as she stared at her reflection. Her eyes were wide, haunted, and her face was pale, almost ghostly. She looked like someone who had been through hell, and maybe, in some way, she had. The darkness inside her stirred, and for a moment, she felt its power surge. It was like a wave crashing over her, filling her with an overwhelming sense of strength. She felt invincible, untouchable, like she could do anything. But as the power surged, so did the fear. What was she becoming? What was she capable of? The whispers started again. soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second. You're ready. You can take control now. You can have everything you've ever wanted. Her breath hitched, and she pressed her hands to her ears, trying to block out the voices, but they only grew louder. The ritual is almost here. The choice is yours. Sarah's pulse raced. The choice. She had to make it soon. She couldn't keep running from it. The next day, she found herself back at the stone circle. The wind had picked up, carrying with it a chill that seemed to cut through her skin. The shadows around her felt deeper, darker, as if they were closing in. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and the power in the air was palpable, almost electric. She stood in the center of the circle, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness inside her was roaring now, clawing at her from within, urging her to embrace it, to let it consume her. You can have power, Sarah. You can have everything. But the price, the sacrifice, the faces of the people she loved flashed in her mind, and she felt a deep, gnawing pain in her chest. Could she really do it? Could she really sacrifice someone she cared about just to gain control over this power? The shadows seemed to respond to her hesitation, twisting and swirling around her, dark tendrils reaching out like fingers, urging her to make a choice. It's not too late. You can take control now. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. The power was there, just beneath her skin, waiting for her to claim it. But at what cost? She thought of the people in her life, her friends, her family, the people who had trusted her. Could she really do this to them? Could she really take their lives, their safety, just to satisfy her own thirst for power? The wind howled, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent. The choice is yours. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the noise, trying to focus. She needed to think. She needed to find a way out of this, a way to control the darkness without losing herself in it. But the more she thought, the more she realized that there was no easy answer. There was no way out. The darkness was a part of her now, and it would always be a part of her. The only question was how she would use it. And then the answer came to her, as if it had been there all along, waiting for her to see it. The next day, Sarah met with the man from the church again. His face was solemn, his eyes tired, as if he had seen too much. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with a knowing look. "I've made my decision," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "I can't fight this anymore, but I don't want to lose myself. I don't want to become them." The man nodded slowly. "You've made the right choice, but it won't be easy. The darkness is powerful, and it will fight you every step of the way. But if you stay true to yourself, you can control it. You can choose how to use it." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. "I'll try. I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try." The man gave her a faint smile, his eyes filled with something like pity. That's all anyone can do. The night of the ritual arrived. Sarah stood in the stone circle, the wind howling around her, the shadows pressing in on all sides. She could feel the power building, the darkness swirling around her like a storm. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. "You can have it all, Sarah. You just have to take it." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She couldn't give in. She couldn't let the darkness control her. She had to be strong. With every ounce of willpower she had, Sarah reached out to the darkness, feeling it swirl around her, tugging at her, trying to pull her under. But this time, she didn't fight it. She embraced it, but she didn't let it consume her. She took control. The darkness surged, but it didn't overwhelm her. Instead, she channeled it, focused it, shaping it to her will. She could feel the power flowing through her, filling her, but she held on to herself, her humanity, her sense of right and wrong. She wouldn't lose herself. Not to this. As the ritual reached its climax, Sarah felt the weight of the choice she had made. The darkness inside her was still there, still powerful, but it no longer controlled her. She had found a way to wield it, to shape it, without letting it consume her. And in that moment, Sarah realized that the true power wasn't in the darkness. It was in her ability to choose. She had made her decision. and no matter what came next, she would face it on her own terms. The days following the ritual were both strange and unsettling. Sarah had taken control of the darkness, but it was like holding a wild animal on a leash. One wrong move, one lapse in concentration, and it could break free. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest crack in her resolve. But for now, it obeyed her. She had returned to her apartment, feeling a sense of unease that she couldn't quite shake. It was as if the world had shifted somehow, and she was no longer quite a part of it. She could feel the eyes of the shadows watching her, the weight of the power inside her pressing down with a constant, low hum. Every time she looked in the mirror, her reflection seemed different. Her eyes glowed faintly, a reflection of the darkness within, and her face seemed sharper, more intense. It was as if the ritual had changed her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But the power, it was intoxicating. She had never felt so alive, so capable. With a thought, she could bend the world around her. She could move objects with a flick of her wrist, manipulate shadows, even influence the thoughts of others. The possibilities were endless. She could have anything she wanted. But with every new ability, the cost seemed to grow. That night, Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment, staring out over the city. The lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt distant, almost unreal. She had once been a part of that world, the world of normal people, of mundane struggles and simple joys. But now, she was something else entirely. She had made her choice. She had embraced the darkness. But what did that mean? What was the price? She had tried to avoid it, tried to ignore the feeling that something was missing, but it was undeniable now. The darkness had taken something from her, something she couldn't get back. It wasn't just the people she loved or the life she had known. It was something deeper, something inside her that she couldn't name. "You can't go back," the voice inside her whispered. "You made the choice. There's no turning back now." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. The wind had picked up, and the chill seemed to seep in her bones. She could feel the darkness inside her, twisting and curling like a living thing, feeding on her doubt, her fear. "You're not alone," the voice continued. "You never were. You've always been one of us." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to block out the whispers, trying to steady her breathing. She had to stay in control. She had to remember who she was. But as she stood there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned, her eyes scanning the darkened streets below, but there was no one there. Still, the feeling lingered. The next day, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. She was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping coffee, when the knock on the door came. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door cautiously, her hand hovering near the small knife she kept on the counter just in case. When she saw who it was, her breath caught in her throat. It was the man from the church. He stood there, his face grim, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. There was no warmth in his gaze, no kindness. He looked almost disappointed. "I knew you would come," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions that flooded her. "I knew you'd come to tell me I made the wrong choice." The man didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on her. Then finally he spoke. "You think you've made the right choice," he said, his voice low and serious. "But you don't understand the consequences. The darkness. It's not something you can control forever. It will take from you. It will change you in ways you can't imagine." Sarah swallowed, a knot forming in her stomach. "I don't care. I can handle it. I've made my decision." The man shook his head slowly, his expression pained. "You don't understand. It's not just about power. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to keep it. The longer you hold on to it, the more it will take. And eventually, it will take everything." Sarah's pulse quickened. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend her choice, but something in the man's eyes made her hesitate. "You're not the first to make this mistake," he continued, his voice softening. "There have been others before you. People who thought they could control it, who thought they could use it without paying the price. But it always catches up with them. Always." Sarah's hands trembled, and for a moment, she felt the darkness stir within her, as if it were responding to the man's words. It was almost like it was angry, like it didn't want her to hear what he was saying. "I've already made my choice," Sarah said, her voice hardening, "and I'll deal with the consequences when they come. But I'm not going back." The man's eyes darkened. "Then you're already lost." He turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he looked back at her one last time. "Remember this, Sarah. The darkness always takes more than you're willing to give. And when it's done with you, it will leave you hollow, empty, and broken. You won't even recognize yourself anymore." The door closed behind him, and Sarah stood there, staring at the empty space where he had been. His words echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them sink in. She had made her decision. She had chosen the power, and nothing would make her regret it. But as the days passed, Sarah began to notice changes. Subtle at first, small things that she could easily dismiss. Her reflection in the mirror seemed off, like a shadow of herself. Her emotions felt distant, as if they were no longer entirely her own. And sometimes, late at night, she would hear faint whispers, not from the darkness, but from the depths of her own mind. "You're not who you were. You never will be again." The voice was familiar, but it wasn't hers. One evening, Sarah stood in front of the mirror again, her fingers brushing the surface of the glass. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. She could feel the darkness pulling at her, urging her to give in, to let it consume her completely. And for the first time since the ritual, Sarah felt a flicker of doubt. Had she made the wrong choice? The darkness had given her power, yes, but it was taking something from her too, something that she couldn't get back. And the price, it was higher than she had ever imagined. The days blurred together, each one heavier than the last. Sarah tried to carry on with her life as if everything was normal, but she could feel the change in her every step, every breath. The darkness inside her had become a constant presence, like an old friend who never left. At first, it was manageable. She could push it aside, compartmentalize it. But now, it was seeping into everything, her thoughts, her actions, her very sense of self. The whispers were louder now. They spoke to her in a language she didn't fully understand, but their meaning was clear. "Take more. You deserve more. You are more." It was tempting, so tempting. She could feel the power in her veins, like fire, like ice, like everything all at once. She could bend the world to her will, shape it like clay. Every time she used the darkness, she felt more alive, more powerful, more in control. But it was a fleeting feeling. As soon as she gave in, it pulled away, leaving her feeling emptier, colder, like she was giving a piece of herself every time she used it. One evening, Sarah stood in the center of her apartment, her hands outstretched, trying to focus. She had been practicing, trying to harness the power, trying to shape it into something more manageable. But the darkness was wild, untamed, and it resisted her control. She had been trying to move a glass across the table, a simple task, but the power surged in unpredictable waves, throwing the glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. The shards glittered like jagged teeth on the floor. Her heart raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was supposed to be in control. She had chosen this path. She had to stay strong. But as she stood there, panting, her pulse hammering in her ears, she felt a shift inside her. The darkness was feeding off her fear, her frustration, and it was growing stronger, more insistent. "You're not strong enough," the voice whispered. "You're not in control. You'll never be." She closed her eyes, willing the voice to go away, but it was relentless. You can't fight it. You don't even want to. You crave it. Her breath hitched. She could feel the truth of those words deep in her chest. It wasn't just the power she wanted, it was the control, the certainty, the sense that she could finally be someone, finally be something. She had always felt like an outsider, always felt like she didn't belong. But now, with the darkness inside her, she felt whole, powerful. "Embrace it," the voice coaxed. "You can have everything." But as she let the darkness swirl around her, as she felt the cold tendrils of it caress her mind, she remembered the man's warning. The darkness always takes more than you're willing to give. She opened her eyes, her hands shaking, and the power immediately began to subside. She couldn't give in, not completely. She couldn't let it consume her. Not yet. The following day, Sarah went out into the city, hoping to clear her mind. The streets were bustling with people, but she felt like a ghost, walking among them without truly belonging. She passed by shops, cafes, people laughing, talking, living their lives, and it all felt so distant, so foreign. She found herself standing in front of the old church, the one she had visited months ago when she first began to seek answers. She hadn't thought about it in a while, but something drew her in. Something whispered that she needed to go inside, that she needed to confront what she had become. The doors creaked open as she stepped inside, the familiar scent of incense and candle wax filling the air. The church was empty, save for a few scattered candles and the faint sound of the wind howling outside. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch longer, deeper, as if they were waiting for her. She walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The altar loomed ahead, bathed in a soft, flickering light. And there, sitting in the front row, was the man, the one who had warned her of the cost of power. His eyes met hers as she approached, and for the first time, she saw something in them. Something more than pity, something like regret. "You came back," he said softly, his voice filled with a quiet sadness. "I knew you would." "I need to understand," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "I need to know what I've done to myself. I need to know if I can stop it before it's too late." The man studied her for a long moment before standing and walking toward her. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "You can't stop it," he said finally. "Not now. The darkness is already inside you. It's already changing you. And once it's taken root, there's no going back." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "But there has to be a way. There has to be something I can do." The man shook his head. "You're not the first to come to me with this question. There are always those who think they can control it, who think they can use it without paying the price. But the darkness doesn't work like that. It takes, and it takes, and it takes until there's nothing left." Sarah's heart sank. "So, I'm already lost." The man's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Not lost. Not yet. But the more you use the darkness, the more it becomes a part of you. And eventually, it will consume you. You'll become a shadow of who you once were. A hollow shell." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just give it up? Walk away?" "You can't just walk away," the man said. "The darkness won't let you. It will fight you every step of the way. But there is one thing you can try. There is a way to free yourself. But it comes at a cost." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What do I have to do?" The man's eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "You have to face the darkness head on. You have to confront it, acknowledge it, and let it take what it wants. You have to give it everything it demands, your humanity, your soul. Only then will it release its hold on you." Sarah recoiled. "You're telling me to give up everything?" He nodded gravely. "Only then can you be free. But you'll never be the same. You'll never be human again." Sarah stood in the church, the weight of the man's words sinking into her. The darkness inside her had already taken so much. How much more could she give before there was nothing left? How much more could she lose? And yet, the temptation was there, always there, urging her to take the easy way out, to embrace the power, to let the darkness consume her completely. "You can have everything," the voice whispered. "You can be everything." She closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath. The path before her was unclear, and every step seemed to lead her further into the abyss. But one thing was certain: the darkness was a part of her now, and whatever choice she made, it would change her forever. Sarah spent the following days in a haze, her mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. The man's words haunted her, echoing in every quiet moment, in every shadow she passed. The darkness was growing inside her, stronger, more insistent. She could feel it tugging at the edges of her mind, urging her to give in, to take more, to embrace it fully. But the more she thought about it, the more the idea of surrendering everything, her humanity, her soul, terrified her. What would she become if she gave in completely? Would she still be Sarah? Or would she be nothing more than a hollow shell, a puppet of the darkness? And yet, the power was intoxicating. It was like a drug, a constant pull at the very core of her being. It was so easy to give in, so easy to let the shadows consume her. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the clock ticking, counting down to the moment when she would have to choose. It was late one night when Sarah finally made up her mind. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was different. Her eyes were darker, her features sharper, more angular, as if the darkness had already begun to reshape her. The power inside her hummed, a constant presence beneath her skin, like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. "You're not human anymore," the voice whispered, its tone sweet, seductive. "You never were. You're something more. Embrace it." Sarah clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had tried to fight it, tried to keep the darkness at bay, but it was always there, lurking, waiting for her to slip. And now, she realized it wasn't just power she craved. It was control. The feeling of being untouchable, of having the world bend to her will. She could have anything. She could do anything. But at what cost? "Everything," the voice answered. "You can have it all. All you have to do is let go." Her breath caught in her throat as the darkness surged within her, swirling like a storm. She could feel it, could almost see it, like black tendrils of smoke, curling around her heart, tightening with each passing second. It was pulling her in, dragging her closer to the edge. "Let go," the voice urged. "Give in. You don't have to fight anymore." The temptation was overwhelming. Sarah's vision blurred, her hands trembling as she reached for the edge of the sink to steady herself. The darkness felt like a living thing, a force that was both terrifying and beautiful. It was calling to her, offering her everything she had ever wanted. But then, a flash of the man's face appeared in her mind. His warning, his sorrowful eyes. "You'll never be the same." Her heart hammered in her chest. She didn't want to become a monster. She didn't want to lose herself completely. But could she really walk away now? Could she really face the darkness and expect it to let her go? The decision was made in an instant. Sarah took a deep breath, closing her eyes, and reached out, not for the power, but for the part of herself that was still human. The part that still remembered who she was, who she had been before all of this. No, she thought, the word a quiet prayer. "I won't let you take me." The darkness recoiled, as if it had been struck. The power surged, threatening to overwhelm her, but she held firm, her grip on her own mind tightening. She could feel the weight of it, the pressure building, but she didn't give in. She was Sarah. She was still Sarah, and she wasn't going to let the darkness define her. For what felt like hours, she stood there, fighting the pull, the temptation, the hunger. The darkness raged inside her, but she fought back with everything she had. The world around her seemed to spin, the air thick with the power that swirled just beneath her skin. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she held on. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the storm inside her began to subside. The darkness pulled back, retreating into the corners of her mind, leaving her standing in the silence of her apartment, trembling but whole. She had done it. She had resisted. For now. The next morning, Sarah awoke with a heavy heart, the weight of the previous night's battle still lingering. The darkness was quieter now, but she could feel it, like a shadow at the edge of her consciousness. It hadn't gone away, not completely. It was still there waiting, but Sarah had learned something in the struggle. She didn't have to give in. She didn't have to let it consume her. She could fight. She could choose. But how long would that last? The days passed, and Sarah's resolve was tested again and again. Each time she used the power, each time she gave in, it felt like a small piece of herself was chipped away. The darkness would pull at her, tempting her with promises of more power, more control, more freedom. And each time she resisted, but it was getting harder. It was a week later when she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, a sense of dread creeping over her. When she picked up, a voice she hadn't heard in weeks filled her ears. "Sarah," the man said, his voice strained. "I told you it would come to this." Her heart sank. "What do you want?" "I want to help you," he replied, his tone urgent. "But it's too late. The darkness has already claimed you. It's just a matter of time before it takes everything." She clenched her jaw, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not lost. I'm still in control." The man's laugh was bitter. "You don't understand. The darkness doesn't let go. It doesn't matter how much you fight it. It's already inside you. It's already changing you." Sarah's breath quickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have a choice," he said. "You can keep fighting, but it will eventually break you. Or you can give in, let the darkness consume you, and it will give you power beyond anything you've ever imagined." Sarah's pulse raced. The choice was so simple, so tempting. The power, the control, it was within her grasp. But she had already made her decision once. Could she make it again? Sarah couldn't sleep that night. The darkness inside her was a constant hum, a reminder of what she had become, of what she was still becoming. It was inescapable, like a weight on her chest that grew heavier with each passing moment. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning in endless circles. "Give in," the voice whispered again, sweet and coaxing. "Let it take you. You know you want to." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but it was impossible. The power was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for her to reach out and claim it. It was so tempting, so easy. But every time she gave in, every time she allowed herself to use it, she felt a part of herself slip away. A piece of her humanity, a piece of the person she had been, faded into the shadows. She had tried to fight it, tried to keep herself intact, but it was getting harder. The man's warning echoed in her mind. The darkness always takes more than you're willing to give. She couldn't afford to lose herself completely. She couldn't let the darkness consume her. But she was starting to wonder if it was already too late. The next morning, Sarah went to work, trying to distract herself with the mundane tasks that had once brought her comfort. But nothing felt the same anymore. The world seemed distant, like she was living in a dream. The people around her were just shadows, moving through their lives without a care, while she was trapped in a battle for her soul. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw the name on the screen, unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sarah," the voice on the other end said. It was the man again, but this time his tone was different, urgent, almost desperate. "You need to listen to me. It's getting worse. The darkness is growing inside you. You're running out of time." Sarah's stomach twisted. "I've been trying to fight it. I've been holding on." "You're not strong enough," he said, his voice strained. "The longer you resist, the more will tear you apart. You need to make a choice, Sarah. You can't keep fighting forever." She clenched her jaw, the words cutting deep. "What do you want me to do?" "I'm telling you, there's only one way out. You have to let go. You have to surrender to it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "You want me to give in?" "I don't want you to," he said softly. "But it's the only way to save yourself. If you don't, it will destroy you." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's mind raced. Could she really give in? Could she embrace the darkness completely, knowing what it would cost her? "I'm not ready," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "None of us are," he replied. "But sometimes we don't get to choose when it's time. The darkness doesn't wait. It will take you whether you're ready or not." She hung up the phone without another word, her heart pounding in her chest. The decision had never seemed so clear, yet so impossible. She didn't want to become the thing the man had warned her about. She didn't want to lose herself completely. But if she kept fighting, if she kept resisting, would she even be able to hold on to anything at all? Later that night, Sarah found herself standing in front of the mirror again, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. The darkness was louder now, pulsing beneath her skin, a constant presence that she couldn't ignore. She felt it, felt the weight of it pressing against her, urging her to give in. "You're not strong enough to fight it," the voice whispered. "You never were." Her hands shook as she reached up to touch her face, her fingers grazing the cool surface of her skin. She could feel the change, the subtle shifts in her features, the way the darkness was slowly but surely altering her. Her eyes were darker now, almost black, and her hair seemed to have taken on a darker hue, as if the shadows were slowly claiming her. She closed her eyes, willing the voice to stop, willing the pull of the darkness to fade. But it was too strong, too all-encompassing. Given it urged, let go. You can have everything you've ever wanted. The power was so close now, just within reach. She could feel it swirling around her, waiting for her to take it, to embrace it fully. And for a moment, she almost did. The temptation was overwhelming, the allure of power so strong that it was almost impossible to resist. But then, just as she was about to give in, she remembered the man's face. His eyes, filled with sorrow and regret. You'll never be the same. She stepped back from the mirror, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She couldn't do it. Not yet. Not like this. She wasn't ready to let go. The next day, Sarah went to the church again. She didn't know why. Maybe she was searching for answers, or maybe she just needed to be somewhere that felt like it could offer some kind of solace. But when she stepped inside, the familiar scent of incense and candle wax filled the air, and she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The man was waiting for her, sitting in the same pew he had been in before. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You came back," he said, his voice softer now. "I knew you would." "I don't know what to do anymore," Sarah admitted, her voice shaky. "The darkness is too strong. I can't fight it." The man stood and walked toward her, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I told you it would come to this. The darkness doesn't let go easily. It takes what it wants, and it doesn't care how much you fight." "I don't want to lose myself," Sarah whispered. "I don't want to become like you." The man's face softened, but only slightly. "You don't have to become like me. You don't have to give in completely. But you have to understand that the darkness is a part of you now. It's inside you, and it will never let you go." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Then what do I do?" He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You fight, as long as you can, but you also accept that it will always be a part of you. You have to learn to live with it, to control it, or it will control you." Sarah nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know if she could do it. She didn't know if she could fight the darkness for the rest of her life. But one thing was certain, she wasn't ready to give up yet.